Dear all viewers, you are listening the Alpa's King love story. In that story, you will enjoy a lot of thrilled, love, and more interesting ending. Before starting story, please subscribe my channel because your one like and subscribe means a lot to me. And after it, please share your thoughts on comments. And if you like the story, so share it with your circle as well. Now, let's start the story. The storm was cruel that night, the kind of cruel that feels personal, as if the sky itself had a grievance against the world below. Rain fell not in drops, but in sheets of shattered glass, slicing through the ancient forest and flooding forgotten paths. And through this desolation, a girl ran. Her name was Lyra, a healer, a wanderer, a soul who listened to the whispers of the wind when no one else would. She wasn't running from anything. She was running toward a sound, a cry woven into the thunder, too soft to be the storm, too human to ignore, a dying sound. The forest tried to hold her back. Branches like skeletal fingers tore at her cloak, and the wind howled warnings in a language of fear. But Lyra's heart was a compass pointed towards suffering, and it did not waver. Her lantern swung wildly, a fading heartbeat of light against the suffocating dark. And then she saw it. A form collapsed by the raging riverbank, white hair matted with mud and something darker. A woman. Her chest rose once, a shallow, terrible breath, then stillness. Lyra dropped to her knees, the cold mud seeping through her clothes. "Please," she whispered, her voice stolen by the wind, "stay with me." The woman's eyes fluttered open. They were silver. Not the silver of coins, but of a wolf's eyes caught in moonlight, ancient and intelligent. She tried to speak, but only a trickle of blood answered from her lips. Lyra's hands flew to the vicious wound on the woman's side. Without thought, driven by a compassion that was her true magic, she began the old words, the forbidden words her grandmother had taught her in secret, syllables that hummed with power and peril. Her palms burned against the cold skin. The very air around them shimmered, charged with energy. For a breathtaking moment, the rain itself seemed to hesitate, every droplet hanging suspended in the air, waiting. And then the impossible happened. The wound began to knit itself together. The flesh whispered back into wholeness. The woman gasped, a raw, ragged sound of shock, her silver eyes wide and locked on Lyra's face. Lyra trembled, a wave of dizziness washing over her. The magic always demanded a price, a piece of her strength, a fragment of her own light, but she paid it willingly. This was her purpose, to heal, even when it hurt. The woman's voice was a cracked whisper. "Why would you risk this for a stranger?" Lyra managed a faint smile, brushing the silver hair from the woman's pale forehead. "Because kindness should not be a risk, it should be a promise." The woman's eyes glistened with something more than rain. She looked at Lyra as if seeing a ghost or a miracle. "You should not have touched me, child." "Why?" Lyra asked, her own breath shallow. "Because shadows follow me," the woman breathed. "And now they will follow you." Before Lyra could question the ominous words, the thunder roared again, this time shaking the very ground, and beneath it another sound rose, a howl, but not from any ordinary wolf. This howl carried weight, intention, a melody of hunger and ancient power. It was a sound that spoke of pack, of territory, of vengeance. Lyra's blood turned to ice. She dragged the woman up, slinging an arm around her, and half carried, half dragged her through the relentless storm toward the faint, welcoming glow of her cottage. Inside, the fire was low, but its warmth was a sanctuary. She laid the stranger on her own bed, covering her with a thick, warm blanket, and knelt beside her, whispering reassurances, until her breathing deepened into exhausted sleep, and the storm's fury finally began to fade. By the gray light of dawn, the woman slept peacefully, her face pale but no longer etched with death. Lyra watched the steady rise and fall of her chest, a profound relief washing through her weary bones. She did not know the truth. She did not know that the woman she had saved was Queen Evangeline, mother of Alpha King Kieran Thorne, sovereign of the Shadowfen wolves, and the key to a dormant curse that had toppled kingdoms. Fate, in its infinite mystery, does not send warnings to those it chooses as its instruments. Lyra simply cleaned the blood from her floor, her hands shaking slightly. "You are safe now," she murmured to the sleeping form, but the words echoed hollowly in the quiet room, because something deep within her spirit, a primal intuition she had always trusted, whispered back a single chilling truth. "No, you are not." That night, under a moon that swelled full and ominous in the sky, the forest awoke with a new, watchful energy. The usual nocturnal sounds ceased, replaced by a thick, pregnant silence. Then, from the ridge above her cottage, eyes appeared, dozens of pairs, glowing like captured embers in the darkness. Wolves. They stood in a perfect, silent circle around her home, not pacing, not hunting, guarding, waiting. Lyra stood at her small window, her breath fogging the cold glass, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She had lived in these woods all her life, had respected the wolves from a distance, but this was different. This was a sentinel, an honor guard. For the first time, she felt the invisible threads of destiny, not as a concept, but as a physical sensation, a delicate, tightening chain around her throat. The woman in her bed was not just a life saved, she was the calm before a cataclysm, and when the lead wolf lifted its majestic head and poured a long, mournful howl into the blood-red moonlight, the sound felt like a key turning in the lock of Lyra's old life. Far away, in a fortress of obsidian and silver, nestled between unforgiving mountains, a man awoke from a dreamless sleep with a gasp that tore from his very soul. An alpha, a king, a son who had mourned his mother for 3 long years. His hand flew to his chest, where a phantom pain bloomed, a feeling of connection, of a thread pulled taut across impossible distances. Kieran Thorne sat up in his vast, empty bed, the shadows of the room clinging to him like a second skin. He looked toward the window, toward the direction his very blood seemed to pull him, and a single word escaped his lips, a plea and a curse all at once. "Mother?" The wind outside his tower screamed in answer, racing through the crags as if carrying urgent news, and in a humble cottage by a forgotten river, Lyra, the healer who saved strangers, awoke from a shallow sleep with unexplained tears on her cheeks and a strange, aching hollow in her heart where only peace had resided before. The dawn that crept over the forest was pallid and chill, mist curling from the river like the breath of a sleeping leviathan. Lyra had not slept more than an hour, her senses stretched taut, listening to the silence of the guarding wolves. Inside, her stranger, her patient, stirred. Lyra was at her side in an instant. The woman's eyes opened, clearer now, that uncanny silver gleaming with lucid intelligence. She took in the small, humble room, the herbs drying from the rafters, Lyra's worried face. "Where have you brought me?" Her voice was still a rasp, but it held an undeniable authority, a grace that did not belong to a simple traveler. "To safety," Lyra said softly, offering a cup of water. "You were terribly hurt. I did what I could." The woman accepted the water, her gaze never leaving Lyra's. "What you did was more than what you could. It was a defiance. You should have left me to the river's mercy." The words were not ungrateful, but heavy with a sorrow that seemed centuries deep. Lyra felt a chill. "I could never." "Compassion," the woman murmured, her eyes drifting to the window. "A beautiful, deadly virtue. When fate claims something, child, to give it back always carries a cost. Always." Lyra swallowed. "Then let the cost be mine. Your life is worth any price." A strange, sad smile touched the woman's lips. You have the heart of a queen and the recklessness of a martyr, a dangerous combination. The wind outside picked up again, but this time it seemed to shape itself, to carry a resonance beneath its howl. Not just wind, but a low, rhythmic chanting, a pulse of power that vibrated in Lyra's teeth. She moved to the window. The mist outside was no longer formless. It swirled and coalesced into the shapes of great wolves, spectral and silent, their misty eyes fixed at the cottage. They were not attacking, they were standing vigil. Lyra pressed her palm flat against the cold glass. Why are they here? What do they want? The woman closed her eyes, a pained expression crossing her elegant features. They remember their oath. They remember me. Lyra turned, her voice dropping to a whisper. Who are you? The question hung in the air, unanswered, swallowed by the growing hum of power from outside. That night, sleep, when it finally came, was not a refuge. It was a prison of visions. Lyra dreamt of a throne carved from a single piece of nightstone under a shattered sky. She saw this woman, radiant and fierce, standing before legions of wolves with eyes of flame. She saw a crown of intertwined silver and thorn placed upon her head. Then the dream twisted. The crown became a cage of brambles. The wolves turned on each other with snarls of betrayal. And a man's, deep and resonant with a grief so profound it shook the foundations of the dream, echoed, "Her return is the curse's awakening, and its hunger is endless." Lyra jolted awake, drenched in a cold sweat, the echo of that voice still ringing in her ears. The fire had died to ashes, and the bed across the room was empty. Her heart leapt into her throat. The door to the cottage stood slightly ajar. Without a thought for her own safety, Lyra threw a cloak over her nightdress and plunged into the pre-dawn gloom. The forest was eerily quiet, the mist still clinging to the ground. She found the woman standing at the very edge of the riverbank, barefoot, her silver hair loose and flowing like a banner. She was staring into the forest, her posture regal, waiting. "Please," Lyra called out softly, approaching, "you are not strong enough. Come back inside." The woman did not turn. They called. A queen must answer, even when the call comes from the grave. Lyra's breath caught. Before she could speak, they reached the tree line, and there, in a small clearing, the wolves waited. Not the mist phantoms, but real, massive beasts with fur of gray and black and eyes that held galaxies of intelligence. As one, as if moved by a single will, they bowed their heads, lowering their great bodies to the ground in a gesture of profound submission. Lyra froze, her blood turning to ice in her veins. The woman lifted a hand, a simple, graceful gesture. The wolves whined softly, a sound of mingled joy and agony. "I was their heart," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion, "before the darkness took me." Lyra could barely form the words. "You're Do not speak the title," the woman interrupting, suddenly turning to Lyra. Her expression was one of heartbreaking tenderness and acute fear. She reached out and cupped Lyra's cheek. Her touch was warm, alive. "Listen to me, child. When they come, you must show no fear. Do not run, do not beg. Stand tall. Your courage will confuse them. It is your only shield." "When who comes?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "My son's wolves, the ones who believe they are protecting a king by erasing his past." As if summoned by her words, the forest erupted. The howls this time were not mournful, but aggressive, closing in. The thunder of hooves and the clash of steel against leather replaced the silence. From the trees, riders burst forth, men and women in polished black armor, their helmets fashioned like wolf heads, their eyes gleaming with a feral light from within. They carried bows, swords, and an aura of lethal efficiency. The woman, Queen Evangeline, cried out, clutching her side where the wound had been. Fresh silvery blood seeped through her gown. "No, it is too soon. He is coming." Lyra rushed to support her as she sagged. Who is coming?" The woman's fingers, suddenly possessing desperate strength, closed around Lyra's wrist. Her silver eyes blazed. "Kieran, my son, the Alpha King." Then the night exploded into chaos. Flaming arrows streaked through the air, embedding in trees. The guardian wolves leapt to defend, meeting the armored riders in a crash of fur and steel. A voice, amplified by power and wrath, boomed over the din, silencing even the clash of battle for a moment. "By the order of the Alpha King, secure the clearing, let no one escape." In the heart of the maelstrom, Lyra held the failing queen, her own tears mixing with the rain of embers falling around them. The woman's lips moved against Lyra's ear. Her final whisper was a secret and a sentence. "He does not know you yet, but he will, and it will shatter his world." Then the light, a blinding silver flash that originated from the queen's own chest, engulfed everything. In that moment of searing brilliance, Lyra understood. She had not just saved a life, she had ignited a war, and the most feared king in all the realms was now, irrevocably, on his way to her. The world dissolved into a nightmare of noise, smoke, and the coppery scent of blood. The once peaceful clearing was now a battleground, a chaotic tapestry of snarling wolves, shouting soldiers, and the eerie, silent fall of glowing embers. Lyra could hardly hear her own thoughts over the cacophony, but she clung to the woman in her arms, a lifeline in the storm. Queen Evangeline had gone frighteningly still, her breath a faint, shallow whisper against Lyra's neck. The Alpha King's riders moved with a terrifying, synchronized lethality, their wolf-helmed faces devoid of any emotion but ruthless purpose. One rider, larger than the others, his armor etched with intricate silver runes, dismounted and tore off his helmet. He was not much older than Lyra, with a face that was all harsh angles and solemn severity, his hair the color of shadow. His eyes, a stormy gray, swept the scene and landed on Lyra and the queen. The world seemed to narrow to that single point. He strode forward, his men parting for him, and the fighting around them stilled into a watchful, tense quiet. He looked at the queen's lifeless form, and something in his stern composure fractured for a single, heart-wrenching second. A ripple of pure, unadulterated pain crossed his features before the mask of the Alpha slammed back down. Then his gaze, cold and assessing, shifted to Lyra. "You," he said, and the word was a command, an accusation, and a question all at once. "Who are you?" Lyra's throat was dust dry. She forced the words out. "I am Lyra. I found her. I tried to save her." "Tried?" His voice was dangerously soft. "You interfered with a fate sealed by the moon itself. Do you have the faintest idea who you held in your arms?" Lyra gathered the tattered remnants of her courage. "I know she was someone who needed help. I know she spoke of her son with love, even at the end. That is all I needed to know." The man, Kieran Thorne, the Shadowfen King, stared at her as if she had spoken in a forgotten tongue. He looked back at his mother, at her peaceful, pale face, and his jaw clenched so tightly Lyra heard the muscle pop. He turned his head away, his shoulders rigid, battling an internal tempest. He snapped his fingers, the sound like a crack of ice. "Take the queen, gently." Two soldiers moved forward. Lyra's arms tightened instinctively around Evangeline. "No, please, she needs." "Take her." Kieran's roar was not human. It was the voice of the mountain, of the deep earth, primal and absolute. The soldiers pried Lyra's hands away. A sound of raw anguish, part sob, part scream, tore from her as she fought, her healer's hands scratching uselessly against armored plates. She would not let this stranger take this woman she had fought so hard to keep alive. She kicked, she struggled, a wild thing caught in a trap of steel and destiny. Then a sound rose that made every soldier freeze mid-motion. A howl. But this did not come from the wolves in the clearing. It came from the man standing before her. It tore from Kieran Thorne's chest, a sound of such profound, gut-wrenching agony and fury that the trees trembled. It was the sound of a bond breaking, of a loss felt so deeply it could only be expressed in the language of the beast. He dropped to one knee, his head bowed, that single soul-rending howl fading into a ragged breath. The soldiers immediately fell back, kneeling, their heads bowed in deference and fear. "Your Majesty," one breathed. Kieran rose, slowly, his movements heavy with a grief that seemed physically to weigh him down. The gray of his eyes was now shot through with filaments of molten silver. He looked first at his mother, then his piercing gaze locked onto Lyra. "She saved her, sire," a soldier said quietly, his head still bowed. "The healer, she fought the death shadow's work. We saw the light." Kieran's voice was a low, vibrating growl. "She failed." "No!" Lyra found her voice again, defiance burning through her fear. "She was dying when I found her. The shadow was already claiming her. I gave her peace. I gave her a moment without pain. Is that a crime?" His eyes met hers, and in that gaze, Lyra saw not just the anger of a king, but the bewildered pain of a son. He took a step closer, and the air grew colder. "The words you used, the healing tongue, where did you learn?" Lyra blinked. My grandmother, she was a wise woman. She taught me the old ways." "Your grandmother was a keeper of forbidden lore. Those words have not been spoken in the presence of royal blood since the Great Sundering." "She was a healer," Lyra insisted, her own temper flaring. "She used them to mend broken bones and fevered brows, not to defy kings." He moved closer still, until Lyra could see the faint silvery scar that cut through his eyebrow, could feel the immense contained power radiating from him like heat from a forge. "Healers do not make the fading linger. They do not call back souls that have already touched the other shore." "I didn't call her back," Lyra cried, her voice breaking. "I only tried to hold her here a little longer. She didn't want to go. She was afraid." Something shifted in Kieran's eyes, not disbelief, but a horrifying, dawning recognition, as if her words had echoed something from a deep, buried part of his memory. He looked down at his mother's face, his expression softening into something unbearably vulnerable. "She used to say that," he murmured, almost to himself. "When my father passed, she said, 'The world is too dark to leave just yet.'" The soldiers remained motionless, the very forest holding its breath. The moment shattered as he straightened, the king's mantle falling over him once more, colder and harder than before. "You will come to Shadowfen Keep." It was not a request. Lyra shook her head. "I cannot leave my home. My life is here." "Your life," he said, his voice final, "is now bound to the truth of what happened here tonight. You have already left." He turned to his commander. "Bring her, and carry my mother home. If the ancient curses wish to challenge me further, let them do so in my own halls." The journey was a blur of fatigue, fear, and surreal imagery. Lyra, her wrists bound with soft but unyielding silver-threaded rope, was placed on a horse. Kieran Thorne rode at the head of the grim procession, a silent, brooding statue. He never looked back. For hours they traveled through forests that grew darker, mountains that grew taller and sharper, as if cutting into the sky itself. Just as despair began to truly take root in Lyra's heart, the trees parted, and she saw it. Shadowfen Keep. It was not a castle as she imagined castles. It was a fortress grown from the very bones of the mountain, of dark stone that gleamed with veins of raw, pulsating silver. Towers clawed at the sky like talons. Blue witchfire burned in sconces along towering walls, and the air hummed with a low, potent energy. As the massive gates, carved with the likeness of a colossal howling wolf, groaned open, a deep, resonant howl echoed from within the walls. 100 voices joined in a haunting, welcoming dirge. The king has returned, and he brings the past with him. They passed through streets where faces, both human and subtly other, peered from doors and windows, their expressions a mix of reverence, fear, and intense curiosity aimed directly at her. Kieran dismounted in a vast courtyard and finally turned to her. His face was etched with exhaustion, the silver in his eyes dimmed to a faint glow. "You saved my mother's life," he stated, his voice flat. "That is a debt the Shadowfen blood recognizes, but what your magic has awoken, what threads you have tangled, that is a question that may yet demand a terrible price." Lyra lifted her chin. "I want no reward. I wanted no part of any of this." "I know," he said, and for the first time she heard something like regret in his tone. "That is what makes you the most dangerous puzzle in my kingdom." He gestured to a stern-looking woman in leather armor. "Take her to the Sunstone Tower. She is not a prisoner, she is a guest, but no one is to see her without my express command." As she was led away across the smooth, cold stones of the keep, Lyra dared one last look back. Kieran Thorne was no longer the imposing Alpha King. He was simply a son, kneeling beside the draped litter that held his mother, his head bowed over her still hand, his shoulders shaking with silent, terrible grief. He was not praying to the gods, he was speaking to her, to the mother he thought lost, and to the strange healer who had for one fleeting moment given her back. And in that raw, private devastation, Lyra saw the first crack in the legend of the untouchable king, and felt an unexpected, piercing sting of empathy in her own heart. The door to the Sunstone Tower closed with a soft, definitive click, sealing Lyra in a silence so profound it echoed. The room was large, circular, and unlike any prison she could have imagined. One entire wall was a curved expanse of windows looking out over a terrifying and majestic vista of jagged peaks and endless forests under a twilight sky. The furnishings were simple but elegant, a bed draped in gray silks, a wooden desk, a chair by a cold fireplace. The air was clean and cool, and the only sound was the distant, mournful song of the wind around the tower's peak, the heartbeat of the Wolf Kingdom. On the third day, as Lyra watched an eagle ride the thermals far below her window, the door opened. It was not the attendant. A man entered, closing the door behind him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his hair tied back, his face marked with scars of a warrior, but his green eyes held a weariness that spoke of more than physical battle. He wore the black leathers of the king's guard, but with a silver clasp that denoted high rank. He placed a tray bearing a steaming pot of tea and honey cakes on the desk and regarded her thoughtfully. "You are the one who touched the Queen's light," he said, his voice a calm, low baritone. Lyra stood from the window seat. "I am Lyra, and I did not touch her light. I healed her wound." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "In our world, healer, they are often the same thing. I am Ronan, commander of the Shadowfen Guard, the king's right hand, and the only fool who still tells him when his temper is blinding his judgment." He studied her, his gaze shrewd but not unkind. "He has not slept since the night he brought you here. He stands vigil in the crypts, where the queen's body rests." Lyra felt a pang. "Then why am I here, in this comfortable exile?" Ronan's expression grew grave. "Because the queen's body does not rest, not truly." A chill crept down Lyra's spine. "What do you mean?" "The wound you closed," Ronan said slowly, choosing his words with care. "It weeps, not blood, but a silvery essence, like captured moonlight. The priests say it is the death shadow's poison, refusing to let go. The king, he can feel it, a wrongness in the blood bond he shared with her, and that wrongness," his eyes locked onto hers, "it echoes in the magic you used. A thread connects you to her still, a thread he cannot sever." Lyra shook her head, backing a step back. "I didn't ask for any thread. I didn't want any of this." "I know," he said, his voice softening. "Belief is a comfort, but it does not change the laws of magic or of curses. You changed the manner of her passing. In our kingdom, that is not just an act of mercy, it is an act of profound consequence." He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "If he summons you, speak only truth and look him in the eye. Wolves respect courage, even in their prey." The summons came the next night. The drums were pounding a particularly urgent rhythm when 2 guards arrived, their expressions impassive. They escorted her down endless spiral staircases and through corridors lined with tapestries depicting great battles and older, stranger rituals. The air grew colder, heavier. Finally, they reached a pair of vast doors, so vast they seemed made for giants, forged from black iron and inlaid with a massive, snarling wolf's head in silver. Without a sound, they swung inward. Lyra stepped into the throne room of the Alpha King, and her breath caught. It was a cavern hewn from the living mountain, the ceiling lost in shadows high above. The floor was a mosaic of onyx and moonstone, forming a sprawling, intricate symbol of a wolf encircled by thorned vines. At the far end, on a dais, sat the throne, a brutal, beautiful thing, carved from petrified wood and silver, looking less like a seat and more like the captured skeleton of some ancient, majestic beast. He was not in armor tonight, but in simple, dark robes that made him seem even more imposing. The crown on his brow was a simple band of twisted silver, like a frozen bolt of lightning. His hands rested on the arms of the throne, and his eyes, those storm gray and silver eyes, were fixed on her as she walked the impossible length of the hall. The room was not empty. Silhouettes moved in the shadows at the edges. Wolves, large and silent, their eyes glowing like pale lamps. They watched her every step. "Come forward." His voice filled the vast space, calm, resonant, and utterly commanding. Lyra's legs felt like water, but she forced them to move, her footsteps echoing like heartbeats in the silence. When she reached the base of the dais, she stopped, lifting her head to meet his gaze. He stood, descending the steps with a predator's grace. He stopped just before her, and she was struck again by the sheer force of his presence, a magnetism that felt both dangerous and strangely compelling. "You healed her," he stated. Lyra nodded. "I did what any healer would do." "You used the old tongue," he countered, his eyes searching her face as if reading a hidden text. "And in doing so, you left a piece of your own spirit intertwined with hers. Do you deny it?" Lyra thought of the dizziness, the deep weariness that had followed the healing. "The magic demands a sacrifice. I gave it willingly. I did not know it would linger." He circled her slowly, not touching her, but his gaze felt like a physical weight. "Why did you help her?" The question was softer now, stripped of its royal command, leaving only a raw curiosity. "Because she was alone," Lyra answered honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. "And in pain. No one should die alone and in pain." He stopped in front of her again, his expression unreadable. "You know what that feels like, to be alone." It wasn't a question. Lyra said nothing, but the truth of it was in her eyes. She had always been the strange girl who talked to plants, who knew too much, who lived on the edges of the village. Kieran's gaze darkened, not with anger, but with a troubled understanding. He reached out suddenly, his movement swift but not aggressive, and caught her wrist. The contact was electric. Heat, not unpleasant, shot up her arm. Where his fingers touched her skin, the faint, almost invisible silvery veins in his own hand pulsed with a soft light. Lyra gasped as a jolt of sensation, not quite a vision, but a flood of feeling passed between them. She saw a younger Kieran, his face less harsh, laughing as a beautiful woman with silver hair placed a crown of summer flowers on his head. She felt his fierce, protective love for her. then a wave of crushing loss, so profound it stole her breath. And then, superimposed over it all, an image of herself, her hands glowing as they had that night by the river, but standing beside the queen, the two figures glowing with the same otherworldly light. She jerked her hand back as if burned, her heart hammering against her ribs. What was that? Kieran stared at his own hand, his fingers curling into a fist. His voice, when he spoke, trembled with a barely contained emotion. A memory that should be dead, a resonance that should not exist. He turned away, pacing back to his throne, but not sitting. The torches in the hall flickered violently. The wolves in the shadows shifted, a low rumble moving through them. You are bound to her, Lyra. Your magic is tangled with the remnants of my mother's soul. That bond, it resonates in my own blood. It is the same frequency as the blood bond between Alpha and Air, the same frequency of the ancient curse that slumbers beneath this mountain. Lyra's mouth went dry. What does that mean? He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw a terrifying conflict, the fury of a king whose world has been upended, and the fascinated dread of a man confronting an impossible mystery. It means your fate and the fate of Shadowfen have now been knotted together. It means you will remain under my protection and my scrutiny until I discern what you truly are, a blessing or a vessel for the end of all things. He sank onto his throne, the weight of kingdoms seeming to press down on him. Take her back to the tower. The order stands. No one touches her. No one speaks to her without my leave. As the guards approached, Lyra found her voice. And what am I, your majesty? In your eyes right now, what am I? Kieran Thorne looked at her, the firelight carving deep shadows into his face. For an instant, the mask was gone, and she saw only exhaustion and a bewildering, reluctant awe. You are a question, he said quietly, and I have never been fond of mysteries I cannot solve. Back in the Sunstone Tower, the silence was no longer just empty, it was charged, humming with the aftermath of that shared, whatever it had been. That night, Lyra dreamed not of thrones or wars, but of a quiet garden under two moons and a sense of belonging so profound it ached. She woke with tears on her cheeks and the unshakable feeling that somewhere in the dark, cold heart of the keep, the Alpha King was dreaming the exact same dream. The moon over Shadowfen Keep had become a constant, watchful presence. It no longer waxed and waned in a normal cycle, but hung, perpetually full and heavy, a great silver eye in the sky. Its light painted the mountains in ghostly hues and seeped into the very stones of Lyra's tower, making the veins of silver in the rock pulse with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Lyra could feel the celestial obsession in her bones. Time lost meaning. Her own heartbeat had developed a strange syncopated rhythm, her own steady pulse, and beneath it, a deeper, slower, powerful beat that she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, was not her own. It was his, Kieran's heart, the Alpha's heart echoing in the cavern of her chest. She woke one night, not from a dream, but from a sensation of being pulled. The air in her room hummed, the silvery veins in the walls glowing brighter, tracing luminous patterns that coalesced near her door. The light pooled, swirled, and grew warmer, then cold, then warm again. And then a voice she knew, a voice that had whispered thanks and warnings by a river, spoke her name. Lyra. She turned. In the corner of the room where the moonlight pooled thickest, a figure stood. Or rather, the moonlight shaped itself into a figure. Queen Evangeline. She was formed of gossamer light and gentle shadow, her features soft, her silver eyes kind and infinitely sad. She was both there and not, a memory given breath. Lyra's own breath caught. She did not feel fear, only a vast, overwhelming sorrow. You passed. I felt it. The queen's luminous form seemed to sigh. Passed? Some doors, once opened, cannot be fully closed. Do not kneel, child. I have no right to your fealty, only to your courage." Lyra remained standing, her voice a whisper. "Why are you here? Why can't you rest?" "To finish the story I began by your riverbank," the queen said, her light drifting closer. "To warn you of the story you have now entered, my story and my son's." She gestured, and the light around her shimmered, showing fleeting images. "I did not just flee an enemy, Lyra. I fled a destiny, a curse laid upon our bloodline the night Kieran was born. The seers spoke of a twin-souled fate. His heart was split between two worlds, the world of the wolf and a world not yet born. He was bound from his first breath to a soul that did not yet walk the earth, a mirror heart." Lyra shook her head, a cold dread settling in her stomach. "I don't understand." "The prophecy," the queen whispered, the image solidifying into a vision of a young Kieran, a crescent moon birthmark glowing on his wrist. It said, "When the wolf's heart finds its mortal echo, the slumbering shadow will stir. The world will burn to be remade in their joined light or their shared darkness." Lyra stumbled back, her hand flying to her own wrist, where a birthmark in the exact same shape, one she had always hidden, seemed to throb. "No, that's just a coincidence, a mark." "It is a sigil," the queen said gently. "His was etched by the moon. Yours was written by fate. You are the echo, Lyra, the other half of the heart split at his birth." Tears welled in Lyra's eyes. "That's impossible. He despises me. He thinks I'm a curse." "He fears what he feels," the queen corrected. "The bond is awakening in him, as it is in you. He senses the connection, but his grief and his duty tell him it is a trick, a poison. He believes you stole his chance to say goodbye to me. In truth, I led you to him, to be his goodbye and his beginning." "Why?" Lyra cried, her voice breaking. "Why would you do that to him, to me?" The queen's light flickered, her expression one of agonized love. "Because the shadow that attacked me, the death shadow, is part of the curse. It feeds on loneliness, on fractured souls. Kieran, ruling alone, grieving alone, he is a beacon for it. He will be consumed, unless his heart is made whole." She floated closer, her luminous hand almost touching Lyra's cheek. "You are not his destruction, child. You are his only chance at salvation, and he is yours. For the bond is a bridge. What wounds one, wounds the other. What strengthens one, strengthens both. You are tied irrevocably in life and in death." Lyra sank to the floor, the weight of the revelation crushing her. "This is a fairy tale, a terrible, cruel fairy tale." "It is our truth," the queen said, her voice beginning to fade, her form dissolving into motes of light. "He is losing the battle within himself. The wolf, the man, the king, they are at war, and soon the beast will rise, not to harm you, but to claim what it has always known is its own." "Wait!" Lyra reached out, but her hand passed through shimmering silver dust. "How do I stop this? How do we break this?" The queen's voice was a distant echo, carried on a wind that wasn't there. "You cannot break what destiny has welded. You can only choose how to bear it, with fear or with faith." And she was gone. The room was dark again, save for the normal moonlight, but the walls still hummed, and in the silence, Lyra heard it, a second heartbeat, strong, fierce, and full of a wild, chaotic pain. His heartbeat, and beneath the pulse, a voice not in her ears, but in her soul, a ragged whisper of torment. "Lyra." She ran to the window. The wind screamed against the glass, and it burst open, showering her with cold night air. The moonlight outside flared, turning the world monochrome silver and black, and from the highest peak of the furthest mountain, a wolf's howl ripped through the night. It was not a sound of hunting or of pack. It was raw. It was furious. It was desperate. It was the sound of a soul tearing itself in two. And Lyra knew, with every fiber of her being, that it was Kieran. The bond was no longer a subtle whisper. It was a scream, and it was calling her name. The Silver Kingdom did not sleep that night. It trembled. A seismic unease rolled through the mountain roots, causing the great wolves of the keep to snarl and pace their dens, their eyes burning with reflected anxiety. The very air thickened, tasting of ozone and wild magic, the precursor to a storm not of clouds, but of spirit. In the highest chamber of the central tower, Kieran Thorne was coming apart. He stood before the mirror of ancestors, a slab of polished obsidian that showed not just reflection, but truth. The face that stared back was his, yet not. His storm-gray eyes were now ringed with a corona of brilliant molten gold, his pupils thin vertical slits. Silvery veins, like cracks in porcelain, traced paths under his skin, glowing with a faint, unholy light. Every exhale was a plume of mist in the cold room, and the immense power he had spent a lifetime mastering now churned within him, a caged typhoon demanding release, demanding her. "Enough," he growled to his reflection, his voice layered, distorted by the beast pressing against the seams of his humanity. The wolf inside, the ancient alpha spirit, was no longer a part of him. It was becoming him. It howled her name in the prison of his mind. Lyra. It was a prayer and a possession. The dreams had become constant, vivid tapestries, where she was not a stranger, but a constant, standing beside his mother in forgotten gardens, speaking the old tongue as if born to it, her hands glowing with the same pure light that had once been her mother's signature. The bond was not a theory, it was an ache in his marrow, a song in his blood that only her presence could quiet. The door to his chamber burst open. Ronan stood there, his face pale. "Your Majesty, the wards on the Sunstone Tower." Kieran turned, and the command in his gaze was no longer entirely human. Ronan, his oldest friend, took an involuntary step back. The torches in the room bent their flames toward the Alpha, as if drawn to the sun of his torment. "What of them?" Kieran's voice was calm, a terrifying calm over a roiling sea. "They ignited," Ronan said, his voice tight. "Silver fire, the kind that hasn't burned since Queen Evangeline performed the rite of binding. The tower is sealed in a cocoon of it." Kieran's head tilted, a predator catching a scent. "She's calling it. She's pulling on the thread. Majesty, you cannot go to her like this. You are not... Get out." The roar was pure, unadulterated alpha command, amplified by a rage born of fear, fear of himself, fear of what he might do. The sound wave shattered the chamber's windows and blew out every torch. Ronan staggered back into the corridor, the echo of the command vibrating in his bones. Kieran didn't see him leave. He was already moving. He tore the reinforced oak door from its hinges as if it were parchment and strode into the hall. Guards flattened themselves against the walls, not in salute, but in primal submission to the force of nature storming past. He was a king in name only now. He was a compass needle drawn irresistibly north. The bond was a physical tether, yanking him through the labyrinthine corridors, up staircases, toward the source of the silvery resonance that called to the wild thing in his soul. He reached the sunstone tower to find the doorway obscured by a swirling vortex of argent fire, ancient runes floating within it, humming a warning. The protective wards, keyed to his mother's magic and now resonating with Lyra's, barred his way. "Open," he commanded, his voice the grinding of continents. The wards flared brighter, resisting. For the first time in years, a smile touched Kieran's lips, a cold, ruthless expression that held no joy. "Then I will remind you who is king here." His hands shifted, not fully, but claws of black keratin edged with silver erupted from his fingertips. He slashed at the wall of magic. The air screamed in protest. Light burst outward in agonized waves, and the stone of the archway cracked with a sound like thunder. When the glare faded, he stood in the doorway. And there she was, Lyra, backlit by the massive window and the swollen moon, dressed in a simple white shift, her dark hair loose and wild from the wind blasting through the open window. She looked like a spirit of the moon itself, fragile, ethereal, and yet radiating a stillness that cut through the chaos in his soul. Her eyes were wide, not with the fear he expected, but with a profound, heartbreaking understanding. "Your Majesty," she breathed, the title a formality that now felt absurd. He crossed the room in a blur, stopping just before her. The heat of him, the scent of snow and pine and raw power washed over her. "Lyra," he said, and her name in his mouth was a sacrament and a sin. "You called me." She shook her head, a silver tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I didn't, I swear it." "You did," he growled, the sound vibrating in her chest. "When you touched my mother's blood, when you sigh in your sleep, when your very breath makes the ancient stones of my keep sing a song they had forgotten." He reached out, his claw-tipped hand trembling as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was searing. "I am in you. I cannot carve you out." Lyra's voice broke. "I don't even know what I am." "You're mine." The words tore from him, raw and unbidden, the truth of the beast spoken aloud. The silence that followed was absolute, charged with the weight of that confession. She looked up at him, her eyes swimming. "I belong to no one." The wolf within him snarled in defiance. "You are. You always were, before either of us drew breath." He moved closer, until his shadow enveloped her, until she could feel the frantic, galloping rhythm of his heart, a rhythm that matched the second beat in her own chest. "I don't belong to you," she repeated, but the tremor in her voice betrayed the lie her body was telling. Kieran's gaze softened, the gold and silver in his eyes swirling like a tempest. "No," he murmured, almost to himself. "You belong to no one, but this bond, it chains us. You feel its pull. Do not lie to me." Lyra's heart was a wild bird, but it was beating in time with his. She did feel it, the invisible cord, the warmth that wasn't hers, the profound sense of rightness that blossomed in his presence against all reason. "Why me?" she whispered, the question a plea. Why would fate chain a king to a healer from the woods? Kieran looked at her as if the answer was written in the tears on her face. "Because fate is a cruel artist. It gives angels to monsters to see if they can remember to pray." She held his gaze, her own tears falling freely now. "She came to me, Kieran, your mother. She told me of the curse, of the split heart." His entire body went rigid. "What did she say?" "She said your heart was born incomplete, that mine is the missing piece." Kieran's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking wildly. "She told you that?" "She told you you would wither without the bond, but that the bond itself might destroy us both." He stepped closer until the space between them was a memory. "Then let it be destruction. Let it be truth. Let it be anything but this half-life of silence and shadow." Kieran, no more, he whispered, his voice fraying at the edges. No more distance, no more pretense. Whatever this is, it is carved into the bones of the world. It is written in us. He reached for her, his hand closing gently around her wrist. The moment his skin met hers, the tower detonated with light, not the harsh silver of the wards, but a warm, golden silver radiance that poured from their joined hands. Their heartbeats synchronized, becoming one strong, steady drum. The walls of the tower pulsed in time. The wolves on the mountains below lifted their voices in a unified, triumphant whole. Lyra gasped as the power surged through her, a river of pure connection. Visions, clearer now, flooded her. Kieran as a boy being taught the old tongue by his mother, Kieran grieving at a greft grave, Kieran staring at a starless sky, feeling a hollow ache he could never name, an ache that she now realized had been her absence. And she saw herself, through his eyes, that first night in the throne room, not as a peasant, but as a puzzle, a light, a terrifying hope. When the light faded, Kieran was on his knees before her, shaking violently. His breathing was ragged, tortured. The wolfish features receded, leaving only the man, pale and sweating. "Lyra," he rasped, "don't move." She fell to her knees in front of him. "What's happening?" He clutched his chest, every silvery vein blazing like a live wire. The air around him shimmered with heat haze, and a pained whine, almost canine, escaped his throat. Terrified, Lyra did the only thing her healer's instincts demanded. She reached out and placed her palms flat against his heaving chest. The moment she needed contact, the violent convulsions stopped. The blinding light dimmed to a soft glow. The agony on his face melted into stunned shock, then into a relief so profound it brought tears to his own eyes. He slumped forward, his forehead coming to rest against her shoulder, his breath hot against her neck. "Only you," he whispered, the words muffled against her skin. "Only your touch can calm the storm." They stayed like that for an eternity, kneeling on the cold floor, the moon their only witness. The Alpha King, brought to his knees not by an enemy, but by the terrifying, beautiful burden of a bond he could no longer deny. And the healer, holding the most powerful being she had ever known, realizing that her touch was not just healing, but it was home for both of them. The morning after the storm within the tower, the kingdom awoke to a fragile, crystalline quiet. The perpetual full moon had finally waned to a normal crescent, and the oppressive energy had lifted, replaced by a watchful, waiting stillness. But in the sunstone tower, Lyra woke alone. The space beside her on the floor where Kieran had finally slumped into an exhausted sleep was empty, the stones cold. The bond, however, was a warm, steady hum in her chest, a comforting, living presence. She could feel him, not his location, but his state, a turbulent sea slowly settling, a fierce concentration, a brewing resolve. The peace was shattered by the sound of marching feet. Her door opened not to a silent attendant, but to Commander Ronan. His face was grim, etched with lines of worry that hadn't been there before. "The Council of Elders has been convened. The king has been summoned to answer for the celestial disturbances, for the silver fire, for the bond." Lyra rose, her simple dress still rumpled from the night. "Answer? To whom?" "To the laws older than this kingdom," Ronan said. "The bond between an alpha and a non-wolf, it is considered an abomination by the old codes, a dilution of the royal bloodline, a danger to the pack's stability." He glanced at the faint, shimmering marks that now traced like delicate lace from Lyra's wrists up her forearms, the visible signature of the bond. "You have tied your soul to the Alpha's lineage. In their eyes, that is not an act of fate. It is an act of treason." Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. Treason? For saving his mother? For a connection I never asked for? Ronan's expression was pitying. Intent does not rewrite law. You have changed him. You have made the untouchable king vulnerable, and in a world of wolves, vulnerability is often mistaken for weakness. He turned to leave. They will come for you soon. When they do, remember what I said: truth and courage. The throne hall, when they brought her there hours later, had been transformed. The vast space was no longer just the king's domain. It was a court of judgment. Elders in robes of somber gray and black stood in a wide semicircle, their faces like carved stone, their eyes pale and piercing. The air smelled of cold incense and older, dustier things, scrolls of law, the memory of ancient verdicts. In the center of the mosaic floor stood Kieran. He wore no crown. His hands were clasped behind his back, his posture rigid, his face a mask of icy neutrality. But Lyra, through the bond, could feel the volcano of fury and protectiveness bubbling beneath the surface. At the head of the elders stood a man so old he seemed made of parchment and spite. Lord Malachi, his voice a dry rustle, broke the silence. Kieran Thorne, son of Evangeline, alpha of Shadowfen, you have allowed an external magic to intertwine with the sacred blood bond. You have let a human touch alter the rhythm of the moon for our people. Do you deny it? Kieran didn't flinch. I deny nothing that is truth. I confirm everything that is fact. Murmurs rippled through the elders. Malachi's thin lips pursed. Your bond with this creature has unbalanced the natural order. Wolves are struggling to hold their human forms under the moon. The mountain itself groans. Your priority to this foreign thread weakens the pack's trust. Kieran's voice was dangerously calm. The mountain groans because it feels a new strength. The pack's trust is mine to earn and hold, not yours to question. Then you leave us no choice, Malachi intoned, his eyes glinting. By the ancient law, an alpha who binds himself outside the blood must stand the trial of the twin moons. If the bond is pure, a blessing from the ancients, the moons will accept your sacrifice. If it is corrupt, a manipulation. He let the sentence hang, his gaze sliding at Lyra with glacial coldness. They will devour you both. Guards, different from the king's own, wearing the gray of the Elder's Guard, seized Lyra and dragged her forward. Kieran took a step, a growl building in his chest, but a sharp look from Malachi stilled him. Interfere, and she is forfeit immediately. They forced Lyra to her knees beside Kieran in the very center of the wolf and thorn mosaic. The stone was icy. Malachi raised a ceremonial dagger, its blade made of pearlescent moonstone. By blood the bond shall be tested. The moons will judge its worth. He turned to Kieran. You may yet step back, renounce the bond, send her away, and your reign continues unchallenged. Kieran's laugh was a sharp, short, bitter sound. My reign began the moment her magic touched my mother's. There is no back to step to. Malachi's smile was thin and cruel. Then may the ancestors have mercy on your soul. He placed the moonstone dagger in Lyra's bound hands. The hilt was freezing, leaching the warmth from her fingers. Let her blood speak. The dagger seemed to move of its own volition, its tip pressing into Lyra's palm, a sharp sting, and then not red blood, but a liquid, glowing silver welled up from the cut, shining with its own light. Gasps echoed through the hall. Elders stumbled back. Impossible! Moon-touched blood? Malachi whispered, his arrogance shattered for a moment. Kieran's chains, literal silver manacles that had been placed on him, shattered. He moved faster than sight, kneeling before Lyra, grabbing the hand that held the dagger, and without hesitation dragged the blade across his own palm. His blood was a vibrant, shimmering gold. He pressed their wounded palms together. Their mingled blood, silver and gold, flared like a small sun had been born in the heart of the throne room. Every elder and guard dropped to their knees, blinded. The great windows high above shattered not inward, but outward as two phantom moons, one silver, one gold, manifested in the daylight sky outside, pouring dual streams of light onto the kneeling pair. The pain was incandescent. It felt as if every cell in Lyra's body was being unraveled and rewoven with threads of fire and starlight. She screamed, but the sound was lost in the roar of power. Through the agony, she felt Kieran's hand tighten around hers. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice somehow clear in the maelstrom. She forced her eyes open, meeting his gaze. His eyes were pure, radiant gold, but in their depths she saw not the beast, but the man, the lonely king, the devoted son. "Let it burn," he said, his voice vibrating with shared pain. "Let it make us real." Their blood flared one last cataclysmic time. Then, silence. The phantom moons vanished, the light died. Lyra slumped, expecting to find herself ashes. Instead, she found herself cradled in Kieran's arms. He was standing, holding her, his own wounds healed into faint, glowing scars. His eyes were no longer storm gray or gold, but a new, steady color, a deep, warm amber, like honeyed whiskey, flecked with silver. The mark of the bond, a delicate intertwining of silver and gold vines, now circled his wrist and traveled up his forearm, a mirror to her own. He looked at the stunned, prostrate council. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but carried to the farthest shadow. "The moons have chosen. The bond is not our curse, it is our covenant. The bloodline does not end, it evolves. The law does not punish love, it is tested by it." He shifted Lyra gently, holding her close as he addressed his people, his pack. "She is under my protection. She is part of my soul. To challenge her is to challenge the very will of the moons you claim to serve." No one spoke. No one dared. Lord Malachi stared at their joined, scarred hands, at the evidence of a magic older than his laws, and bowed his head in the face of a power he could not comprehend. That night, Lyra awoke in the king's chambers, in a vast bed that smelled of pine and him. Kieran sat in a chair by the fire, watching her. "We're alive," she murmured, her voice hoarse. He nodded, moving to sit on the edge of the bed. "Barely." "What now?" she whispered. He took her hand, his thumb stroking the new silvery gold scar on her palm. "Now," he said, a faint, weary smile touching his lips, "they will fear what we are together." "Is that a good thing?" He looked at their joined hands, the scars glowing faintly in the firelight. "It is a necessary thing. Rest. The war with the elders is over." He lay down beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, could feel the steady, synchronized beat of their hearts through the bond. "The other war," he added, softly, his eyes closing. "The war for our future has just begun." Outside, under the now normal crescent moon, the wolves of Shadowfen howled, not in challenge or mourning, but in a complex, beautiful song of acceptance and awe. Their king and his moon-touched queen had survived the judgment of heaven, and the bond written in their blood had become the new, unbreakable law of the land. The peace that followed the trial was brittle, a thin layer of ice over deep, dark water. The council was silenced, but not dissolved. Their disapproval hung in the air of the keep like a chill mist. The bond, however, was a constant warm sun in Lyra's center. It had settled into a quiet hum, a connection that felt less like a chain and more like an anchor. She could feel Kieran's moods as shifts in the weather within her, a cool focus when he was in meetings, a warm contentment when he looked at her across a room, a sudden protective flare when an elder's gaze lingered on her too long. She was given the freedom of the royal gardens, a breathtaking terraced expanse of night-blooming flowers and silvery-leafed trees that seemed to drink the moonlight. It was here, among the luminescent whisper willows, that she began to learn, not just about the kingdom, but about herself. Kieran, often silent but always present, would point out a plant whose properties she knew, but whose magical resonance was new. "This one," he said one evening, touching a flower that glowed like a captured star, "is called Eve's Tear. My mother used it in healing poultices. She said it responded to intent, not just recipe." Lyra reached out, and as her fingers brushed the petals, they brightened, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She gasped, pulling her hand back. Kieran watched her, his amber, silver eyes thoughtful. "Your magic is not just healing, Lyra. It is communion. It speaks to the life in things. My mother's was the same." He looked away, toward the mountains. "It is why the bond chose you, or perhaps why you called to the bond." They spent hours like this, in a companionship that was slowly deepening into trust, into something more fragile and terrifying. He told her of his childhood, of a father who was a stern strategist and a mother who was his sanctuary. She spoke of her grandmother, of the village that always found her a little too strange, of the simple joy of helping something grow or mend. They never spoke of the bond as destiny or curse. They spoke around it, through it, as one might speak around a fire that both warmed and threatened to burn. One afternoon, Ronan found them in the library, where Lyra was carefully transcribing some of her grandmother's remedies onto fresh parchment. His face was tight. "Sire, a scout has returned from the Blackwood, the area where the Queen was found. There are signs." Kieran straightened. The easy rapport vanished, replaced by the alert Alpha. "Signs of what?" "Disturbance. The earth is wrong, blighted. Plants are twisted, not dead, but corrupted. And there are whispers from the local sprites of a hunger that walks there at night, a shadow that drinks light." Lyra felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Kieran's gaze snapped at her, and through the bond she felt a surge of his concern, not for the kingdom, but for her. "The death shadow," he murmured. "It's not gone. It's festering where its attempt was thwarted." That night, the dreams returned, but they were not dreams of gardens or thrones. They were nightmares. Lyra was back by the river, but the water was black and thick like oil. The Queen stood on the opposite bank, but she was not luminous. She was dark, her silver eyes now empty pits, her mouth moving in silent screams. And from the black water, a formless, insatiable darkness began to crawl toward Lyra, whispering in a voice that was the absence of sound. "You took my meal. Now I shall feast on the source." She woke with a strangled cry, sitting bolt upright. Across the chamber, Kieran was already on his feet, a sword in his hand that hadn't been there a moment before. He was at her side in an instant. "What is it?" She was trembling, the cold of the dream clinging to her. "The shadow, it's not just a memory, it's alive, it's angry, it's coming for the magic that denied it." She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "It's coming for me." Kieran's face hardened into an expression of absolute resolve. "It will have to go through me." "That's what it wants," Lyra said, grabbing his arm. "Don't you see? It's the curse. It wants to wound you through me, to break you by taking what you—" She trailed off, unable to say the words. "What you have come to care for." "What I am bound to," he finished for her, his voice low. "Then we break the curse first." He spent the next few days in deep consultation with the keep's archivists and the few remaining mystics who were loyal to him, not the council. Lyra helped, using her knowledge of herbs and natural lore to cross-reference with their ancient bestiaries. The answer, when they found it, was in a crumbling scroll written in the Old Tongue. Lyra, to everyone's surprise, including her own, could read it fluently. "It speaks of the death shadow," she translated, her finger tracing the elegant script. "It is not a creature, but a manifestation, a spiritual parasite born from a specific kind of grief, the grief of a soul severed from its bonded heart before its time. It feeds on that unresolved connection, that loneliness." She looked up at Kieran, who was listening intently. "It says the shadow that attacked your mother, it was born the day your father died." Kieran went very still. My father fell in battle. It was a clean death, honored. But was it a resolved one for her? Lyra asked gently. The scroll says the shadow emerges when a bonded mate dies with words of love unspoken, with peace unmade. It latches on to the surviving heart, festering in its loneliness. She read on, her blood turning colder. To defeat it, the source of its nourishment must be healed. The unresolved bond must be settled, laid to rest. Kieran sank into a chair, running a hand over his face. How does one settle a bond with the dead? There is a right, Lyra said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The right of echoing peace. The living bonded heart must journey to the place where the shadow first took root, accompanied by a heart echo, a soul resonating on the same frequency. She met his gaze. That's me. The bond we share, it echoes the one your parents had. I am the key to reaching her, to giving her the peace she needs to finally release her hold on this grief, and in doing so, starve the shadow. It's too dangerous, Kieran stated immediately. The blackwood is blighted. The shadow will be strongest there. It's the only way, Lyra insisted. If we don't, it will keep growing, feeding on the edges of our bond now too. It will poison everything. Ronan, who had been standing by the door, spoke up. The Blackwood is also borderland, sire. The Nightfang pack claims hunting rights there. If they catch wind of the Shadowfen Alpha and his companion in their territory, it could be seen as an act of aggression. Kieran looked from Ronan to Lyra, the weight of kingship and the fear of the man warring in his eyes. Through the bond, Lyra sent him a pulse of steady certainty, of courage that was not her own, but that she borrowed from his very presence. He felt it. His shoulders straightened. Then we go quietly, and we go prepared. Ronan, select 5 of your best. We leave at moonset. The journey to the Blackwood was tense and silent. They moved like ghosts through the dense forest, the trusted guards forming a protective circle around Kieran and Lyra. The further they went, the more the forest changed. The vibrant greens turned muted, then sickly. The air grew thin and cold, and a profound silence descended, broken only by the crunch of their boots on brittle leaves. The very life of the place was being sucked away. They reached the riverbank as the moon began to rise. It was exactly as Lyra remembered, yet utterly alien. The water was dark and sluggish. The clearing where she had found Evangeline was now a circle of blackened, twisted grass. In the center of the circle, the air shimmered with a malevolent, heatless darkness, the death shadow. It had form here, a shifting, humanoid shape of pure void, with 2 points of silver light where eyes might be. It turned toward them as they entered the clearing, and a wave of despair, of utter, soul-crushing loneliness washed over them. The guards staggered. Lyra cried out, the emotion so intense it was physical pain. Kieran stepped in front of her, his body radiating a golden light that pushed back against the oppressive gloom. "You will not touch her," he snarled, his voice thick with the wolf. The shadow seemed to laugh, a sound of rustling leaves and breaking bones. "You brought the echo," it hissed, its voice in their minds. "You bring me a feast to replace the one she stole." "Now, Lyra," Kieran said, his voice a command and a plea. Lyra closed her eyes, pushing past the terror. She thought not of the shadow, but of the queen, of her kindness, her sorrow, her love for her son. She thought of the bond she shared with Kieran not as a curse, but as a bridge. She began to sing, not the old tongue of power, but a simple, wordless lullaby her grandmother used to sing, a melody of comfort and release. As she sang, she poured her intent into the bond, aimed it not at the shadow, but at the memory of Evangeline, at the love that had been trapped here. The silvery light of her magic, gentle and persistent, began to weave through the clearing. It sought out the remnants of the queen's spirit, the echoes of her joy and her pain. Kieran, understanding, added his own strength. His golden light joined hers, not in attack, but in guidance, in love. Together, their combined light formed a luminous image of Queen Evangeline, not as a ghost, but as a memory made real. She stood between them and the shadow, radiant and smiling, looking at her son with utter peace. "My love is not here in this pain," the memory seemed to say. "My love is in you, Kieran. It is in the life you build. Let me go." The shadow screamed, a sound of fury and starvation. It lunged for the memory but passed through it like smoke. Its form began to unravel, dissipating. It had fed on unresolved grief. Confronted with love, acceptance, and peace, it had nothing to consume. As the last tendrils of darkness vanished, the clearing seemed to exhale. Color seeped back into the grass. The river's murmur returned, sounding clean and clear. The oppressive silence lifted. The luminous image of Evangeline turned to Lyra, her smile deepening. She nodded once, a gesture of thanks and blessing, and then faded, not into darkness, but into the soft, starlit air. Lyra slumped, exhausted. Kieran caught her, holding her close. His heart was pounding, but with relief, not fear. He looked around the now peaceful clearing, then down at the woman in his arms. "It's done," he whispered. "The shadow is gone." But as they turned to leave, Ronan held up a hand, his head cocked. From the tree line, new figures emerged, not shadows, but wolves, large with fur the color of charcoal and eyes of blazing crimson, the Night Fang Patrol. Their leader, a massive male with a scar across his muzzle, stepped forward, his gaze traveling from Kieran to Lyra to the fading traces of powerful magic in the air. His lips pulled back in a snarl that was not quite hostile, but deeply suspicious. "Well, well," the Night Fang Alpha rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "Shadowfen King, performing unsanctioned magic on our land, and with a human no less. You have much explaining to do." The tentative peace they had just won had ended. A new, more political and equally dangerous threat had just emerged from the trees. The tension in the cleansed clearing was now of a different, sharper kind. The 5 Night Fang wolves fanned out, not in an overt attack formation, but in a clear display of territorial dominance. Their alpha, a formidable creature Lyra heard Kieran address as Vorlak, stood with his massive arms crossed, his crimson eyes missing nothing. "Vorlak," Kieran said, his voice regaining its cool, diplomatic cadence, though Kieran could feel the alert readiness thrumming through the bond. "We meant no trespass. We were tracking a spiritual blight that originated here, a danger to all the forests." Vorlak's gaze flickered to the now healthy grass, to the peacefully flowing river. "A blight you seem to have handled, with human magic," he said the last 2 words with a distaste that was palpable. "The Blackwood is under Night Fang protection, Thorne. Any blight here was ours to manage. Your presence and your use of unfamiliar power is a complication." Ronan took a subtle step forward, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "The blight was a death shadow, Vorlak, born of a grief your mystics would have been powerless against. It is gone, the forest is healed. That should be cause for thanks, not contention." Vorlak ignored Ronan, his eyes locked on Lyra. "And this is the source of the unfamiliar power, the human?" Lyra felt the collective gaze of the Night Fang wolves, their scrutiny like a physical pressure. She straightened her shoulders, refusing to look away. Kieran moved slightly, positioning himself more squarely between her and Vorlak. "She is under my protection," he said, the words a low, unambiguous growl. A slow, calculating smile spread across Vorlak's scarred face. "Is that so? The great Shadowfen Alpha bound to a human's protection. How the mighty legends fall." The insult hung in the air. Kieran didn't rise to it. He remained still, a statue of contained power. The legends are being rewritten, Vorlak, by actions, not words. We have done you a service. We will take our leave. Not so fast, Vorlak said, holding up a hand. A service rendered without request creates a debt or an obligation. The Council of Pax meets at the next full moon at the Stone of Howls. You will attend, Shadowfen, and you will bring your human. The Pax will decide what her magic and your bond means for the balance of our world. He leaned in, his voice dropping. The Blood Moon Pack whispers that your connection is an abomination. The Frostmane Alpha fears it is a weapon. My own seers dream of a human-shaped key turning in a wolf-shaped lock. Ignorance breeds fear, Thorne, and fear breeds war. You have until the next full moon to prepare your defense. With that, Vorlak gave a sharp jerk of his head. His wolves melted back into the trees as silently as they had arrived. The threat, however, remained, thicker than the forest mist. The journey back to Shadowfen Keep was shrouded in grim silence. The victory over the Death Shadow felt hollow, overshadowed by the larger, more political storm now gathering on the horizon. Lyra could feel Kieran's mind working, strategizing, the weight of his responsibility as Alpha pressing down on him. She also felt, beneath it, a fierce, unwavering protectiveness directed at her. Back in the privacy of his war room, with only Ronan present, Kieran finally let the mask slip. He paced before a large map of the surrounding territories. The Council of Pax hasn't been convened in 50 years, not since the War of the Silver Rivers. He stabbed a finger at the map. Vorlak is right. The Blood Moon Alpha, Garen, is a traditionalist fanatic. He would see Lyra executed as a corrupting influence. Frostmane's leader, Yvain, is pragmatic but paranoid. She will see a potential weapon and will either want it controlled or destroyed. Lyra sat quietly, feeling like a pawn on a board she didn't understand. "So what do we do?" Lyra asked, her voice small. "We show them," Kieran said, a determined light entering his amber-silver eyes. "We show them that you are not a corruption, but a completion, that your magic is not a weapon, but a healing. We show them that our bond makes us stronger, not weaker." He stood. "Ronan, summon our mystics, and bring the keeper of the crown jewels." Ronan's eyebrows shot up. "The crown jewels, sire?" "Specifically," Kieran said, his gaze never leaving Lyra's, "the moon-silver diadem. It hasn't been worn since my mother's coronation. It responds to the heart of a true queen." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. "Kieran, no, I'm not a queen. I'm a healer from the woods." "You are the heart echo of a queen," he said softly. "You carry her magic, her compassion, and you carry a piece of my soul. In the ways that matter to our people, that is what a queen is." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Lyra was coached relentlessly by the Keep's most respected historians and diplomats on pack law, etiquette, and the complex web of alliances and enmities. It was overwhelming. Meanwhile, Kieran was often absent, meeting with his commanders, sending carefully worded missives to potential allies among the other packs, like the more progressive Sunstalker clan. The night before they were to leave for the Stone of Howls, the Keeper brought the moon-silver diadem to Lyra's chamber. It was breathtaking. A delicate, intricate band of woven silver so fine it seemed like moonlight given shape, set with a single teardrop moonstone that glowed with an inner light. As the Keeper lifted it, the stone pulsed, and a gentle, silvery resonance filled the room, a resonance that matched the frequency of Lyra's own magic. When it was placed gently on her brow, it felt not like a weight, but like a homecoming. It settled perfectly, the moonstone glowing softly against her skin. In the mirror, she didn't see a peasant healer. She saw someone else, someone with purpose, with a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. Kieran entered as she was staring at her reflection. He stopped in the doorway, his breath catching. For a long moment, he just looked at her, an unreadable emotion swirling in his eyes. Awe, pride, and something deeper, more tender. "You see," he said quietly, walking behind her. He didn't touch her, but his reflection in the glass stood close. The crown knows its own. The journey to the Stone of Howls was a somber procession. Hundreds of Shadowfen wolves in both human and wolf form flanked their alpha's party, a show of unwavering support. The stone itself was a vast, flat plain dominated by a single, monstrous monolith of black rock, covered in ancient, worn carvings of wolves and moons. Around it, the camps of the other 6 great packs were already assembled, their banners flying: crimson for Bloodmoon, ice blue for Frostmane, charcoal for Nightfang, gold for Sunstalker, green for Mosswood, and russet for Swiftwater. The air crackled with competitive energy, with suspicion, and with raw primal power. As Kieran's contingent took their place, all eyes turned to them. Whispers spread like wildfire, focusing not on Kieran, but on Lyra, on the diadem glowing on her forehead. The gathering of alphas on the speaking platform before the stone fell silent as Kieran led Lyra forward. Garen of Bloodmoon, a hulking man with a permanent scowl, was the first to speak, his voice a derisive boom. "So the rumors are true. Shadowfen parades his pet human before the sacred stone, and he has her wear the sacred silver. This is an outrage." Yvain of Frostmane, an elegant woman with hair the color of frost and eyes like chips of ice, studied Lyra with detached interest. "The diadem glows for her, Garen. That is not a small thing. It suggests the magic is recognized, if not understood." Vorlak of Nightfang smirked. "Recognition is not acceptance. We are here to judge the risk, not admire the light show." The Sunstalker Alpha, a man named Theron with kind eyes and sun-bleached hair, spoke more measuredly. "The law is clear. A bond that affects the stability of the packs is a matter for the Council. But law also demands evidence, not just fear. Let the Alpha of Shadowfen speak." Kieran stepped forward, his voice carrying easily across the hushed plain. "I am Kieran Thorne, Alpha of Shadowfen. This is Lyra. She is a healer. She saved my mother's spirit from an eternal torment, and in doing so awakened a bond written in the stars at my birth. This bond is not my choice. It is my truth, and it has made me and my pack stronger." He gestured to the Shadowfen wolves, who let out a unified, supportive howl that shook the ground. Garen sneered. "Stronger? Your wolves whimper that they cannot hold their forms under the moon since this entanglement." Kieran didn't flinch. "A temporary adjustment. A pack growing into a new strength often experiences growing pains. They are adapting, not weakening." He turned his gaze to the other alphas. Lyra's magic healed a death shadow that was festering in the Blackwood, a blight that threatened all our lands. Her power is of life, of unity, not of corruption. Our bond is a bridge, not a weapon. I ask not for your blessing, but for your wisdom. See not with the eyes of tradition, but with the eyes of the future." A murmur ran through the crowd. Yvain leaned forward. "Words are wind, Shadowfen. Can she demonstrate this healing power? Can she prove it is controlled?" It was a challenge, and a dangerous one. Before Kieran could answer, Lyra stepped forward. She was terrified, her heart hammered against her ribs, but the diadem on her brow was cool, calming. She could feel Kieran's steady confidence flowing into her through the bond. She looked at Yvain, then at the gathered thousands. "I am a healer," she said, her voice clear and surprisingly steady. "My power answers to need, not to command. But I will offer this. She pointed to the edge of the plain, where an ancient, gnarled tree stood, half its branches blackened and dead, a victim of some past lightning strike. That tree is dying, not from blight, but from an old wound. My magic cannot command it to live, but it can offer it the choice to heal if there is still life within it to answer. Without waiting for permission, she walked toward the tree. A profound silence fell. This was uncharted territory. No human had ever performed magic before the Council of Pax. Lyra placed her hands on the scorched bark. She closed her eyes, shutting out the watching thousands, the skeptical alphas, and the weight of her own fear. She thought of life, of stubborn roots digging deep, of the will to reach for the sun. She hummed her grandmother's lullaby and let her magic, soft and silvery and full of gentle intent, flow into the tree. For a moment, nothing happened. Kieran snorted. Then a faint green glow appeared at the base of the trunk. It traveled up through the blackened wood like spreading veins of emerald light. The dead, brittle branches trembled. Then, impossibly, tiny, bright green buds pushed their way through the charred bark. New, vibrant leaves unfurled where moments before there had been only death. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. It was not a dramatic, explosive magic. It was quiet, profound, and undeniably real. It was the magic of renewal. Lyra stepped back, pale but composed. The tree stood, half black, half now bursting with new life, a perfect symbol of healing after trauma. Theron of Sunstalker was the first to react. He stood and gave a slow, respectful nod. That is not the magic of corruption. Yvain's icy demeanor had thawed into one of thoughtful intrigue. Even Vorlak looked grudgingly impressed. But Kieran of Bloodmoon was not swayed. His face was purple with rage. A trick, a pretty illusion. It proves nothing about the danger of the bond. The law states that a non-wolf who influences an alpha's power must be subjected to the ordeal of the silent moon, to see if the bond is of true resonance or of magical coercion. The crowd erupted in arguments. The ordeal of the silent moon was an ancient, brutal test where the bonded pair were separated and subjected to magical and psychological torments meant to break false bonds. Many had not survived. Kieran's roar silenced them all. "I will not subject her to that." "Then you admit the bond is false," Kieran shot back. "You admit you were under a human spell." The stalemate was complete, teetering on the brink of violence. Lyra looked from Kieran's furious, protective face to the hostile glare of Kieran, to the uncertain faces of the other alphas. The fate of the Pax and of her life with Kieran hung in the balance. The peace she had fought for was once again slipping away, threatened not by a shadow, but by the even more formidable forces of fear and tradition. The silence after Darren's challenge was thicker than the mountain fog, heavy with the promise of violence. The blood moon wolves at Garen's back began to growl, a low, rolling thunder of aggression. In response, the shadow fen ranks stiffened, a forest of gray and black fur and bared teeth. The other packs watched, tense, their loyalties divided and uncertain. The Stone of Howls, meant for unity, was about to become a battlefield. Lyra's mind raced. The ordeal of the silent moon. The very name sounded like a death sentence. She could feel Kieran's rage through the bond, a white-hot, protective fury that would gladly burn the world to keep her safe. But she also felt the immense weight of his duty, the catastrophic cost of a war between Shadowfen and Bloodmoon that would drag every other pack into the chaos. She had healed a tree. Now she had to heal this rift, and she had only moments to do it. Before Kieran could issue a command that would start the war, Lyra stepped forward, directly into the space between him and Kieran. The move was so unexpected, so brazenly against all protocol, that it momentarily stunned both alphas. "Alpha Kieran," she said, her voice not loud but clear and carrying in the shocked quiet. You speak of the law, and you are right to honor it." Kieran made a sharp, pained sound behind her, but she pressed on. "The ordeal of the silent moon tests the truth of a bond. Is that correct?" Garen eyed her with suspicion, but also a flicker of curiosity at her audacity. "It does, to see if it is true resonance of souls or a magical trickery. The weak human magic would break under its strain, revealing the fraud." Lyra nodded, as if considering a trade at a market. "And if the bond is proven true by the ordeal, what then?" Garen scoffed. "If? A human and an alpha? It is impossible." "But if," Lyra insisted, holding his gaze, "if the ordeal proves our bond is true, by the ancient laws you hold so dear, what is the verdict?" Garen glanced at the other alphas who were listening intently. Yvain of Frostmane spoke, her voice cool. "The law is clear. A bond proven true before the stone is sacred. It is recognized by all packs. Any challenge to it thereafter is an act of war against the united will of the council." Lyra took a deep breath, the moon-silver diadem cool against her heated brow. "Then I will undergo the ordeal." A collective gasp swept the plain. Kieran's hand shot out and gripped her arm. "Lyra, no! You don't understand what it entails." "I understand enough," she said softly, turning to look at him. She poured every ounce of her feeling into the bond, not fear, but certainty, trust, love. "I understand that our bond is real. I understand that this is the only way to end the threat, not just for us, but for everyone, without bloodshed. I trust it, and I trust you." The look in his eyes was of utter torment. He was being asked to stand by and allow the woman who held his soul to be subjected to a torture designed to break it. But he also saw the steel in her resolve, the healer's courage that sought to mend the deepest wound of all, the wound of fear. He searched her face, and through their connection he felt no deception, only a profound, heartbreaking bravery. His grip on her arm softened, then fell away. He gave the smallest, agonized nod. Garen looked triumphant, but also unnerved by her willingness. "So be it. The ordeal will begin at moon high tonight. Prepare her." The atmosphere turned from volatile to grimly ceremonial. A space was cleared before the great stone. The mystics from each pack, including Shadowfens, came together to prepare the sacred circle and the powerful, isolating spells of the ordeal. Lyra was taken to a simple tent to prepare, accompanied only by a stern-faced Frostmane mystic as a neutral observer. Kieran was barred from seeing her. The ordeal required absolute separation. The bond would be tested by silence, by distance, by magical assault. Lyra sat in the tent, her hands clasped in her lap, trying to calm her frantic heart. She thought of the river, of the dying queen. She thought of the quiet gardens of Shadowfen, of Kieran's rare smiles. She thought of the tree pushing forth new life from the scar. She held on to those images like talismans. As Moon High approached, she was led out. She wore a simple white shift. The diadem had been removed. In the center of the vast carved circle on the ground, a single post of smooth, dock wood stood. She was guided to it, and her wrists were bound to it with cords of woven moonlight, not tight, but unbreakable. Across the circle, 50 paces away, Garen was forced to his knees by 4 mystics, his own powers bound by shimmering golden chains. He could watch, but he could not interfere. The pain and fury in his eyes were a physical blow to her heart. The head mystic, an ancient woman from the Mosswood pack with eyes like deep pools, raised her arms. "Let the ordeal of the silent moon begin. Let silence descend. Let the bond be laid bare." A dome of absolute quiet fell over the circle, sealing Lyra and Kieran in a pocket of void. She could see his lips move, forming her name, but no sound reached her. Then the first trial began, the trial of solitude. It was not physical isolation, it was psychic, a crushing weight of loneliness amplified 100-fold by the mystic's magic descended upon her. It was the loneliness of her childhood, of being the strange girl. It was the loneliness of the healer, always giving, rarely receiving. It was the existential loneliness of a single soul in an uncaring universe. It pressed upon her, whispering that she was nothing, that she was alone, that the bond was a fantasy her desperate mind had crafted. She cried out, but no sound escaped the silent dome. She looked at Kieran and saw him straining against his bonds, his face a mask of shared agony. He was feeling it too. The ordeal was attacking the bond itself. Just as she felt she would shatter into a million lonely pieces, she focused. She didn't fight the feeling. She embraced it. She remembered the moment their palms had bled together at the trial of the twin moons. She remembered the feeling of his heartbeat syncing with hers in the Sunstone Tower. She thought, I am not alone. His heart beats with mine. And deep in her chest, the bond answered. A warm, golden pulse cut through the icy loneliness. It was faint, but it was there, a lifeline. The crushing weight lessened. She had passed the first test. The mystics exchanged glances. The second trial began. The trial of terror. Phantasms materialized in the silent circle, monstrous wolves made of shadow hurtling toward her, visions of Kieran turning away in disgust, images of her cottage burning, of her grandmother's grave desecrated. They were illusions, but they felt real, smelled real, their malevolent intent a tangible force. Fear, pure and primal, clawed at her throat. She shut her eyes, but the visions were in her mind. She began to tremble violently. Then, through the bond, she felt not fear, but a surge of defiant, protective rage. Kieran, he was sending her his strength, his unwavering certainty. She opened her eyes, not at the phantasms, but at him. He was staring straight at her, his amber-silver eyes blazing like torches in the gloom. No words were needed. In his gaze, she saw a promise. I am here. They are not real. We are real. She clung to that gaze, to the feeling of his spirit wrapped around hers. The phantom wolves dissipated like smoke. The visions faded. Her trembling stopped. The ancient mosswood mystic looked intrigued. The third and final trial was the most dangerous, the trial of severance. This was a direct, magical assault on the bond itself. The mystics joined their power, weaving a spell of pure negation, a blade of anti-magic designed to find a connection between two souls and slice it cleanly. Lyra felt it as a cold, sharp pain in the center of her chest, a sensation of something vital being pulled, stretched, threatened with snapping. She gasped, doubling over against the post. Across the circle, Kieran roared in silent agony, the golden chains around him glowing white-hot as he fought. This was the true test. A false bond, a magical construct, would shatter under this pressure. A bond of mere convenience or lust would fray and break. The searing cold dug deeper, seeking the core of their connection. Lyra felt disoriented, fragmented. For a terrifying moment, the bond flickered, growing dim. Panic seized her. No, this is real. This is everything. She didn't just think it, she poured her entire self into the thought. Every memory, every shared glance, every moment of understanding, every pulse of his heartbeat in her chest. She thought of his grief, his loneliness, his strength. She thought of her own purpose, her healing, and how it had inexorably become intertwined with his protection. She didn't just believe the bond was real, she was the bond. And from Kieran, through the fading connection, came a final, colossal surge, not of alpha power, but of something purer, more vulnerable. It was an offering. It was his deepest fear, the fear of losing her, and his greatest hope, the hope of a future with her. It was love, raw and unadorned, stripped of all titles and power. That love slammed into her own offering, and where the severing magic sought to cut, it found instead a fusion. Their souls didn't just resist being severed, they burned brighter, woven together so tightly that the magical blade shattered against them. The silent dome exploded outward with a soundless blast of pure white light. The moonlight cords around Lyra's wrists dissolved, the golden chains around Kieran's shattered, the mystics were thrown back. The light faded, leaving the two of them standing and kneeling in the center of the circle, unharmed, connected by a visible thrumming cord of silver and gold light that stretched between their chests. The bond was not just intact, it was gloriously, undeniably visible to all. The absolute silence of the plane was broken by a single awed whisper from Theron of Sunstalker. "By the great moon, it's true!" The cord of light pulsed once, brilliantly, and then faded from sight, sinking back into their beings. Lyra stumbled forward, freed, and Kieran was there in an instant, catching her, holding her close. He was shaking, but so was she. They clung to each other, not as alpha and healer, but as two souls who had just had the truth of their union carved into the fabric of reality before thousands of witnesses. Garen of Bloodmoon stood, his face pale, his earlier bluster completely gone. He looked at the other alphas, who were all arising, their expressions ranging from shock to reverence. The ancient mosswood mystic approached the circle, her wise eyes filled with tears. She bowed her head first to Lyra, then to Kieran. "The ordeal is complete. The bond is true. It is sacred, recognized by the stone and by the old powers." She turned to the assembled council. "The law is satisfied." One by one, the alphas bowed their heads in acknowledgement, Yvain with newfound respect, Theron with warmth, Vorlak with grudging acceptance, and finally, after a long, tense moment, Garen gave a stiff, curt nod, the highest concession he could muster. The threat of war evaporated. The Pax would not challenge the bond. Lyra was safe. Their union was law. Kieran looked down at Lyra in his arms, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The bond sang between them, a symphony of relief, of triumph, of a love that had been tested in the fiercest crucible and had emerged not just unbroken, but unbreakable. The Stone of Howls, for the first time in generations, had not been a place of division, but of a new, unexpected unity, and at its center stood not just a king, but a king and his queen, forged in silence and proven in light. The return to Shadowfen Keep was not a somber procession, but a triumphant one. News of the ordeal's outcome had raced ahead of them on the wind, carried by scouts and the howls of wolves. The people of Shadowfen, who had watched their alpha leave with grim determination, now lined the road to the gates, their faces alight with awe and celebration. Flowers, rare in the mountain climate, were thrown in their path. The air rang with joyous howls and the beating of drums that spoke of victory, not war. Lyra, riding beside Kieran on a gentle gray mare, felt overwhelmed. The adulation was for them, for the bond they had defended. She was no longer the mysterious, potentially dangerous human in the tower. She was the moon-touched queen, the one who had faced the silent moon and whose bond had shone with the light of truth. The moon-silver diadem felt different on her brow now, not a borrowed symbol, but a rightful one. Inside the keep, a great feast was prepared. The great hall, usually a place of stern efficiency, was transformed with banners and torchlight. For the first time, Lyra sat at the high table beside Kieran, not as a guest or a prisoner, but as his equal. The elders who had once condemned her now offered stiff, formal bows. The change was dizzying. Yet, amid the celebration, a quiet understanding passed between her and Kieran. The victory at the Stone of Howls had secured their place, but it had not answered every question. It had not explained the full nature of her magic, or the deeper implications of a human soul bonded so completely to a wolf alpha. It had not erased the lingering glances of alphas like Vorlak, who saw not a person, but a powerful new piece on the political board. A few days after their return, Kieran found her in the royal gardens at twilight. She was tending to a patch of Eve's tear, her hands glowing softly as she encouraged the shy blooms. He watched her for a moment, a softness in his expression that was becoming more familiar. "You have a way with growing things," he said, announcing his presence. She looked up and smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that made his heart constrict. "It's easier than politics." He came to sit on a stone bench nearby. "The emissary from Frostmain arrived today. Yvain formally invites you, specifically you, to visit her hold in the ice caves. She wishes to consult with you on matters of botanical resonance, as she put it." Lyra wiped her hands on her apron, frowning slightly. "She sees my magic as a tool, a resource. She sees it as something valuable, which is an improvement over seeing it as a threat," Kieran replied. "But you are not a resource to be consulted. You are a queen. You may go if you wish, or you may decline. The choice is yours." He said it with such simple conviction, as if her autonomy was the most natural thing in the world. It was a gift more precious to her than any crown. "I think I will go," Lyra said after a moment, "not as a tool, but as a healer, and as a queen seeking understanding with a neighbor." Kieran nodded, pleased. "Ronan will accompany you with a full guard. I would come myself, but the Blood Moon border needs a personal reminder of the council's decision." There was a hint of the old, dangerous alpha in his tone, but it was tempered now. He was not going to start a war, he was going to enforce a peace. Lyra sat beside him on the bench. The bond between them was a quiet, contented home. "It's strange," she mused, looking out over the terraced gardens falling away toward the darkening forest. "I spent my life trying to be invisible, to help quietly and move on, and now I am the most visible person in 5 kingdoms." "I was never invisible to you," Kieran said quietly. "Even before I knew you, I felt the absence you filled." She looked at him, her heart full. The journey from the riverbank to this garden felt like a lifetime. He had been a figure of fear, then of cold authority, then of shared peril, and now he was Kieran, the man whose soul was knit to hers. She reached out, and he took her hand, their fingers intertwining, the silvery gold scars on their palms aligned, glowing faintly at the contact. "There is still so much we don't know," she whispered, "about my past, about why this happened to us. We have time to learn," he said, his thumbs stroking her knuckles. "Together. The curses are broken, the laws are satisfied. The future," he looked at their joined hands, then back to her face, "the future is ours to shape." In the weeks that followed, they began that shaping. Lyra's visit to Frostmain was a success. Yvain, it turned out, had a deep, scholarly interest in the intersection of natural magic and wolf lore. They spent days in the glittering ice libraries, and Lyra found she could offer insights that stunned the Frostmain mystics. She returned with not just a stronger alliance, but with scrolls of knowledge that helped her understand her own abilities better. Back at Shadowfen, she established a true healer's hall, merging her grandmother's remedies with the mystical knowledge of the wolf healers. She treated not just the wolves, but the human craftsmen and families who lived in and around the keep. Her magic, once a source of fear, became a source of hope and health. Kieran watched her bloom in her role with a pride that warmed him to his core. He governed with a new balance, his decisions informed by her compassion and her unique perspective. The pack, sensing the harmony between their leaders, grew stronger and more united than ever. One evening, they stood on the highest balcony of the keep, watching the twin moons, one silver, one a faint gold, rise over the mountains. The world was at peace, for now. "Do you ever wonder," Lyra asked, leaning back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her, "if she knew, your mother, Did she know that by leading me to you, she was giving us both this? Kieran rested his chin on her head. I think she hoped. She was always a believer in unlikely things, in love that could bridge any divide. He was silent for a moment. I spent years grieving her, building walls of stone and duty. I thought strength was in solitude, in being untouchable. He turned her gently to face him, his amber silver eyes serious in the moonlight. You showed me true strength is in connection, in having something, someone to protect, to cherish. You didn't just heal a wound on the riverbank, Lyra. You healed me. Tears pricked her eyes. She cupped his face in her hands. And you didn't just save me from the elders or the other packs, Kieran. You saw me, the real me, and you gave me a home. He smiled, that rare, true smile that transformed his entire face. We saved each other. That's what the bond always was. Not a chain, but a promise. A promise that no matter how dark the night, we would never be alone again. He leaned down and his lips met hers in a kiss that was not passion, but a solemn vow. It was a sealing of the... Yet, amid the celebration, a quiet understanding passed between her and Kieran. The victory at the Stone of Howls had secured their place, but it had not answered every question. It had not explained the full nature of her magic, or the deeper implications of a human soul bonded so completely to a wolf alpha. It had not erased the lingering glances of alphas like Vorlak, who saw not a person, but a powerful new piece on the political board. A few days after their return, Kieran found her in the royal gardens at twilight. She was tending to a patch of Eve's tear, her hands glowing softly as she encouraged the shy blooms. He watched her for a moment, a softness in his expression that was becoming more familiar. You have a way with growing things, he said, announcing his presence. She looked up and smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that made his heart constrict. It's easier than politics. He came to sit on a stone bench nearby. The emissary from Frostmane arrived today. Yvain formally invites you, specifically you, to visit her hold in the ice caves. She wishes to consult with you on matters of botanical resonance, as she put it. Lyra wiped her hands on her apron, frowning slightly. She sees my magic as a tool, a resource. She sees it as something valuable, which is an improvement over seeing it as a threat, Kieran replied. But you are not a resource to be consulted. You are a queen. You may go if you wish, or you may decline. The choice is yours. He said it with such simple conviction, as if her autonomy was the most natural thing in the world. It was a gift more precious to her than any crown. I think I will go, Lyra said after a moment, not as a tool, but as a healer, and as a queen seeking understanding with a neighbor. Kieran nodded, pleased. Ronan will accompany you with a full guard. I would come myself, but the Blood Moon border needs a personal reminder of the council's decision. There was a hint of the old, dangerous alpha in his tone, but it was tempered now. He was not going to start a war, he was going to enforce a peace. Lyra sat beside him on the bench. The bond between them was a quiet, contented home. It's strange, she mused, looking out over the terraced gardens falling away toward the darkening forest. I spent my life trying to be invisible, to help quietly and move on, and now I am the most visible person in 5 kingdoms. I was never invisible to you, Kieran said quietly. Even before I knew you, I felt the absence you filled. She looked at him, her heart full. The journey from the riverbank to this garden felt like a lifetime. He had been a figure of fear, then of cold authority, then of shared peril. And now, he was Kieran, the man whose soul was knit to hers. She reached out, and he took her hand, their fingers intertwining, the silvery gold scars on their palms aligned, glowing faintly at the contact. There is still so much we don't know, she whispered. about my past, about why this happened to us. We have time to learn, he said, his thumbs stroking her knuckles. Together. The curses are broken, the laws are satisfied. The future, he looked at their joined hands, then back to her face. The future is ours to shape. In the weeks that followed, they began that shaping. Lyra's visit to Frostmane was a success. Yvain, it turned out, had a deep, scholarly interest in the intersection of natural magic and wolf lore. They spent days in the glittering ice libraries, and Lyra found she could offer insights that stunned the Frostmane mystics. She returned. Chapter 11. The Unseen Fracture. The harmony that settled over Shadowfen was profound, but it was not absolute. It was the deep, resonant quiet of a forest after a storm, where the air is clean, but fallen branches still litter the ground. For Lyra, the peace was a daily wonder. She walked the halls of the keep not as a prisoner or a curiosity, but as its lady. Her healer's hall thrived, a place of light and murmured spells where wolf and human alike found solace. Her bond with Kieran was a constant, warm presence in her chest, a silent conversation of shared glances and subtle smiles. Yet, in the deepest watches of the night, a new and subtle disturbance began. Not in the bond, which remained strong and clear, but in the magic that flowed through her. It started as a faint dissonance, like a single sour. Chapter 11. The Unseen Fracture. The harmony that settled over Shadowfen was profound, but it was not absolute. It was the deep, resonant quiet of a forest after a storm, where the air is clean, but fallen branches still litter the ground. For Lyra, the peace was a daily wonder. She walked the halls of the keep not as a prisoner or a curiosity, but as its lady. Her healer's hall thrived, a place of light and murmured spells where wolf and human alike found solace. Her bond with Kieran was a constant, warm presence in her chest, a silent conversation of shared glances and subtle smiles. Yet, in the deepest watches of the night, a new and subtle disturbance began. Not in the bond, which remained strong and clear, but in the magic that flowed through her. It started as a faint dissonance, like a single sour note in a beautiful chord. When she healed a young guard's broken arm, her silvery light flickered unexpectedly, causing a brief spike of pain before the bone knit perfectly. She dismissed it as fatigue. Then, while encouraging a blighted crop in the lower fields, her magic surged beyond her control, causing the plants to grow wildly, unnaturally fast, before wilting just as quickly. The farmers looked at her with confusion, not gratitude. Worse were the dreams, not nightmares of shadows or trials, but disjointed, overwhelming flashes. She saw towering trees of crystal, forests of whispering glass, and a city built not on stone, but on the interwoven roots of colossal sleeping beings. She heard a language that was both alien and hauntingly familiar, a melody without words that called to a place deep in her spirit. She would wake with the taste of ozone and cold dew on her tongue, and a yearning for a home she had never known. She confided in Kieran one morning as they broke their fast. "It's like my magic is homesick," she said, struggling to find the words. "It's restless. It wants to go somewhere or do something that I don't understand." Kieran listened, his brow furrowed. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers, sending the usual calming pulse through the bond. But this time, beneath the calm, she felt a thread of his own new concern. "I have felt it too," he admitted, his voice low. "Not in the magic, but in the land. The scouts report tremors in the far northern ranges, not of earth, but of energy. Strange lights in the sky over the whispering deeps. The ancient wolves in the high dens are restless, speaking of the old world stirring." He looked at her, his amber-silver eyes serious. "Our bond changed us, Lyra, but I fear it may have changed more than just us. It may have been a key, turned in a lock we didn't know existed. Their theory was tested sooner than they imagined. Ronan arrived with urgent news, his usual composure fractured. "Sire, a delegation has arrived, not from any of the 7 packs." He swallowed. "They come from beyond the impassable peaks. They ask for an audience with the moon-touched queen." The great hall, which had witnessed judgment, triumph, and celebration, now held an air of profound, unknown strangeness. The delegation was 3 in number. They were tall and slender, their skin having a faint, opalescent sheen, and their eyes were the color of clear, deep water. They wore robes of living moss and woven bark that seemed to shift subtly with their breathing. They carried an aura of immense age and a quiet, formidable power that was neither wolf nor human magic. At their head stood a woman who introduced herself as Lyra of the Sylvan Blade. "We have felt the awakening," Lyra said, her voice like the sound of wind through 1,000 leaves. Her gaze, intelligent and piercing, settled on Lyra. "For centuries, the magic of the world heart has slept, its conduits, our people, dormant. The great bond between wolf and earth was severed long ago, a casualty of an ancient war. But a new bond has been forged, a bridge, your bond." She stepped closer, and she felt her own magic stir violently in response, a painful, beautiful ache. "You are not merely moon-touched, child. The magic you wield is not borrowed, it is remembered. You are a scion of the world heart, a seed of the Sylvan, sleeping in human form, awakened by the love of a wolf king." The revelation hit Lyra like a physical blow. Her grandmother's secretive teachings, her affinity for growing things, the strange dreams, it all crystallized into a terrifying, glorious truth. She was not just a healer, she was a lost piece of an ancient race. Kieran moved to stand beside Lyra, his presence a solid wall of support. "What do you want with her?" His tone was the alpha's, protective and demanding. Lyra's expression held a deep sorrow. "The awakening is incomplete. The bond you share has reconnected 2 great powers, the wolf's soul and the world heart. But the connection is raw, unstable. It is causing ripples across the magical strata. The tremors, the wild growths, the restless spirits, these are symptoms. If the connection is not stabilized, formally consecrated by the old rites, it will tear itself apart, and in its death throes, it could shatter the magical balance of this entire continent." She looked directly at Lyra. "You must come to the Sylvan Glade. You must learn who you truly are, and with your bonded king at your side, you must undergo the rite of roots and crowns. You must willingly choose to anchor your awakened power, to become the permanent bridge between our worlds. If you do not, the fracture will widen, your magic will consume you, and the feedback will destroy him." Her gaze shifted to Kieran. "The bond you cherish will become the weapon that kills you both." The choice was no longer about politics or personal peace. It was a cosmological imperative. Lyra looked at Kieran, seeing her own dread reflected in his eyes. They had fought for their right to be together. Now they had to journey into the heart of the unknown to secure the very foundation of that togetherness, or see it all annihilated. The peace they had won was an illusion. A far greater trial, one of identity and cosmic duty, had just begun. Chapter 12. The Path to the Glade. The decision, once made, was irrevocable. There was no alternative. The evidence was in the increasingly erratic pulse of Lyra's magic, in the worried reports from mystics across all 7 packs, in the silent, pleading look in Lyra's ancient eyes. They would travel to the Sylvan Glade, a place not sound on any map, a realm that existed in the folds between the seen and the unseen world.
Preparations were hushed and swift. Kieran named Ronan as steward of Shadowfen in his absence. The trust between them was absolute, wordless. There were no grand farewells, no public pronouncements. To the people of the keep, the king and queen were retreating to the high mountain sanctuaries for a period of private reflection, a plausible tale. The truth was too volatile, too frightening.
The Sylvan delegation led them, not by road or path, but by song. Lyra would hum a low, complex melody, and the forest itself would respond. Trees seemed to step aside, revealing hidden passages. Streams changed course to guide them. The very light filtered through the canopy in shifting, purposeful patterns. It was a journey through a living, conscious landscape. Lyra felt a profound sense of belonging and alienation simultaneously. Every leaf, every stone sang to her blood, yet it was a song from a childhood she'd never had. Kieran walked beside her, a constant grounding presence. The wolf in him was on high alert in this enchanted place, but he kept it leashed, his focus entirely on Lyra. The bond thrummed with a new kind of tension, not fear of separation, but the strain of her magic reacting to its ancestral home. It flickered and flared within her like a storm lantern in a gale. On the third day of their uncanny trek, they camped in a clearing where the flowers glowed with a soft internal bioluminescence. Alara approached Lyra as she tried to calm her restless magic by tending to a cluster of luminous blue ferns. "The struggle is because you are fighting yourself," Alara said softly. "Your human heart clings to a singular form, a linear life. The sylvan heart is fluid, connected to the flow of all growing things. You must not resist the memories. Let them in." That night, Lyra didn't just dream, she remembered. She saw a great tree, its trunk wide as a city, its branches holding aloft spheres of glowing mist. She saw beings of light and leaf, like Alara, weaving songs into the very sap of the world. She saw a devastating breach, a tear of violent, consuming darkness, a darkness that felt sickeningly familiar, like the death shadow but 1,000 times vaster, that severed the connection between the world heart and the other magical races, including the wolves. The Sylvan went dormant to survive. The wolves were left with only a fading echo of the primal power that once fueled their deepest bonds. She woke with tears streaming down her face, the knowledge sitting heavy in her soul. She was a child of that cataclysm, a seed sent away for safekeeping, her magic and memory locked away in human form until the time was right for a reunion. Her grandmother hadn't just been a wise woman, she had been a guardian, the last of a line tasked with preserving the spark. She shared the vision with Kieran at dawn. He listened, his face grim. "The shadow that attacked my mother, it was a remnant, a scar from that ancient war. Our bond didn't just awaken your power, it drew the attention of everything connected to that old wound." The scope of their situation was daunting. They weren't just fixing a personal problem, they were attempting to heal a millennia-old schism in the fabric of reality. Finally, after days of travel that felt outside of time, they reached the glade. There was no grand gate, no towering city. One moment they were in deep, ancient forest, and the next they stepped into a space that defied logic. The air was gold and green. Trees of impossible variety grew in harmonious clusters, crystal-barked birches next to oak trees with leaves of flickering flame. A river of liquid light meandered through the center. In the heart of it all stood the world heart tree from her vision, emanating a pulse of life so potent it was a physical pressure on the skin. Hundreds of Sylvan watched their arrival, their expressions a mix of hope, curiosity, and deep anxiety. Lyra's magic erupted within her. Silver light, uncontained, burst from her hands, her eyes, her very pores. She cried out, not in pain, but in overwhelming overload. The glow of the diadem on her brow became blinding. Kieran grabbed her, pulling against him, his voice cutting through the sensory torrent. "My heartbeat, our bond, anchor yourself there." She clung to him, pressing her ear to his chest, blocking out the glorious, terrifying symphony of the glade. She found his steady rhythm, the familiar cadence of their linked souls. Slowly, painfully, she pulled her magic back from the brink, containing it once more, though now it felt like holding back a river with a dam of reeds. An elder Sylvan, even more ancient than Alara, approached her. He was called Father Root. "The scion has returned," he intoned, his voice the crackle of growth and the groan of deep earth. "But she is intertwined with a foreign soul. The right of roots and crowns is meant for two of the glade. We have never performed it for a bonded pair of different worlds. The risk is incalculable." "Then we will define the calculus," Kieran said, his arm still firmly around Lyra. "Our bond is our strength. It is what called you to us. It must be part of the solution." Father Root studied them for a long, silent minute, his gaze seeing more than their forms. He looked at the visible pulse of the bond between their chests, at the way their auras, gold and silver, swirled together defensively. "A bridge must be anchored on both sides," Father Root murmured, as if to himself. "The wolf's soul is a deep root, holding fast to the material world. The sylvan soul is the reaching crown, touching the realm of pure magic. Perhaps it is not an aberration. Perhaps it is a new design." He nodded slowly. "We will attempt the right, but know this, it will not test your love, it will test your very natures. The wolf must be willing to be unmade, the sylvan must be willing to be rooted. To succeed, you must surrender what you are, to become what you must be." The stage was set for the most profound transformation of their lives. Under the brows of the world heart, surrounded by the silent hope of a lost people, Lyra and Kieran prepared to step into a ritual that promised either a united future or mutual annihilation. The path of the healer and the king had led them to the edge of creation itself. Chapter 13. The Rite of Roots and Crowns. The glade prepared for the rite with a solemn, silent urgency. The Sylvan did not build altars or light fires. Instead, they sang. A low, polyphonic hum rose from hundreds of throats, weaving into the air and causing the world heart tree to resonate in sympathy. Its bark glowed, and from its highest branches 2 vines descended, one silvery and delicate, sparkling with dew-like light, the other dark and strong, threaded with veins of gold. Lyra and Kieran were led to the base of the colossal tree. They were asked to remove their outer garments, standing barefoot on the cool, living moss that radiated from the trunk. The hum of the glade and the tree was inside Lyra's skull now, a pressure and a call. Her magic writhed in response, eager and terrified.
Father Root stood before them. "The rite has 3 stages," he explained, his voice part of the song. "The unmaking, the merging, the becoming. You will be guided, but you must lead with your will. Your bond is your tether. If you lose hold of it, even for a moment, your individual essences will be lost in the torrent of primal magic." He gestured, and the 2 vines coiled towards them. The silvery vine gently wrapped around Lyra's waist and up her arm. The dark vine did the same to Kieran. The moment they made contact, the world fell away. The unmaking. It was not pain, but dissolution. Lyra felt her human form begin to unravel. She was not a body, but a collection of memories. The smell of her grandmother's herbs, the chill of the river water, the feel of soil under her nails, the searing warmth of Kieran's hand in hers. These memories started to scatter like dandelion seeds in a hurricane. Panic, pure and formless, seized her. She was coming apart. I am Lyra. I am a healer. The thoughts were fragile, insubstantial. Simultaneously, Kieran experienced his own unmaking. The solid certainty of the alpha, the feel of muscle and bone, the taste of the wind on the mountain, the weight of the crown, all of it streamed away like smoke. He was left with the core of himself, a fierce protectiveness, a relentless will, a loneliness that had only recently been filled. That loneliness echoed, threatening to expand and consume the fragile point of light that was his sense of self. Lyra, her name was the only solid thing in the void. Through the dissolving chaos, the bond remained. It was no longer a thread of light, but a shared anchor point, a single unwavering note in the screaming symphony of uncreation. Lyra felt Kieran's protective will. Kieran felt Lyra's stubborn grip on identity. They held on to each other's essence, not with hands, but with soul. The merging, as their individual forms dissolved, their essences flowed together. It was not a blending, but an intertwining. Lyra's sylvan magic, the wild, growing, luminous life force, surged forward. It met the deep, grounded, territorial power of Kieran's wolf soul. At first, they repelled each other, like oil and water. The conflict sent shockwaves through the psychic space, mirrored by a physical tremor that shook the glade, causing the sylvan song to waver. Surrender. The understanding came not from Father Root, but from the bond itself. They could not force a union. They had to allow it. Letting go of the last shreds of defensive control, Lyra offered her magic not as a wall, but as an open stream. Kieran offered his strength not as a shield, but as a riverbank, willing to be shaped, to give direction to the flood. Her silver light poured into the channels of his golden resolve. His steadfastness provided structure for her boundless potential. In that moment of mutual surrender, they merged. Their memories didn't combine, they became accessible to one another. Lyra felt the raw joy of Kieran's first shift under the moon, as if it were her own. Kieran felt the profound, quiet satisfaction of Lyra saving a fledgling bird with her gentle magic. They were two streams becoming a single, mighty river. The becoming. The merged essence now hovered in the void, a new, unstable constellation of silver and gold. The song of the glade changed, becoming a directive, a template. The world heart tree pulsed, and the two vines that held their physical forms began to glow fiercely. The template was not for a sylvan or a wolf. It was for something new, a bridge, a guardian of the threshold. They had to choose their new form, together. The bond was the loom, and their united will was the weaver. They thought not of what they had been, but of what they were together. Strength and compassion, roots and reach, protection and growth, the crown and the anchor. In the physical glade, the sylvan watching gasped. The vines pulled Lyra and Kieran towards each other, not to collide, but to orbit. A sphere of intertwined light, a core of brilliant gold wrapped in a swirling nebula of silver, formed around them, lifting them off the ground. Inside the sphere, their physical bodies reformed, but changed. Lyra's hair held strands of living gold, and her eyes now swirled with amber flecks amidst the silver. Kieran's pupils held a ring of silver light, and the marks on his skin glowed with a sylvan intricacy. The silvery gold scar on their palms was no longer a scar, but a living, pulsing sigil. The sphere of light condensed, then exploded outward in a silent wave of pure, harmonized energy. It washed over the glade, and where it touched, flowers bloomed instantly. Crystal trees sang a clear note, and the river of light ran brighter. The fracture in the magical strata, the unseen wound, shuddered and began slowly to knit itself back together. The sphere dissipated, lowering Lyra and Kieran back to the moss. They stood slightly apart, breathing heavily. They looked at each other. They were themselves, yet profoundly other. Lyra could feel the solid, unwavering strength of the mountain within her. Kieran could sense the subtle, singing connections to every leaf and root in the glade. The bond was still there, but it was no longer a connection between two separate things. It was the foundational law of their new united being. They were not two souls sharing a bond. They were one soul with two expressions. Father Root approached, tears of luminous sap flowing down his bark-like cheeks. He bowed deeply, and every sylvan in the glade followed suit. "The bridge is forged," he whispered, his voice full of awe. "The wolf is rooted, the sylvan is crowned, the worlds are whole." The rite was over. They had survived. They had become. But as the euphoria of transformation settled, a new and daunting reality dawned. They were no longer just the king and queen of Shadowfen. They were something the world had not seen since the dawn of time, and they had to return to a world that was utterly unprepared for what they had become. Chapter 14: The Return of the Guardians. The journey back from the Sylvan Glade was not a reversal, but a procession. Lyra and Kieran did not walk, the forest carried them. Roots rose to form a smooth path, canopies bent to shade them. The journey that had taken days inward lasted mere hours on the return. The world itself acknowledged what they were, easing their passage. The change within them was mirrored by a subtle change in the land they passed through. Colors were sharper, scents richer, the silence more profound and less empty. They emerged from the tree line near Shadowfen Keep under a sky streaked with rose and gold of dawn. The sentinels on the walls, who had been watching for any sign for weeks, froze at their approach. It was not the king and queen they recognized. It was their essence, their faces, but illuminated from within by a quiet dual radiance. Lyra moved with an unnatural grace, each step seeming to kiss the earth.
Kieran's presence was even more imposing, not just the power of an alpha, but the ancient, patient strength of a bedrock mountain. And between them, the air hummed with a visible harmony, a shimmering field where gold and silver light danced in perpetual, beautiful entanglement. Ronan, alerted by the stunned silence, rushed to the gate. He skidded to a halt, his warrior's discipline shattered. He stared, his mouth slightly agape. "Sire? My lady?" The words were a question. "We are ourselves, Ronan," Kieran said, and his voice held its familiar timbre, but layered with a deeper, resonant echo, like stones shifting deep in the earth. "And we are more." Lyra smiled, and the simple gesture made the dewdrops on the nearby grass sparkle with extra brilliance. "The fracture is healed, Commander. The world is settling." She reached out a hand, and a wilting flower by the gatepost straightened, its petals regaining their vibrant hue. "We have much to explain." The explanation, delivered in the war room to Ronan and a select few of the most trusted elders and mystics, was met with stunned silence, then dawning awe, and finally, a spike of anxiety. The mystics could feel the rightness of it, the healed flow of magic in the air. The elders saw the political ramifications. Their leaders were no longer just wolves. They were living legends, avatars of an ancient unity. This would inspire some and terrify others. News, of course, could not be contained. It spread from the mystics' whispers to the pack's collective consciousness in a matter of days. The people of Shadowfen felt the difference. The pervasive, low-level anxiety that had thrummed since the bond first awoke was gone, replaced by a profound sense of security and vitality. Crops in the lower valleys grew with astonishing vigor. Newborn pups were stronger, their eyes clear and intelligent. The very stones of the keep felt warmer, more alive. But beyond Shadowfen's borders, the reaction was mixed. Theron of Sunstalker sent congratulations and a request for an audience, his curiosity boundless. Yvain of Frostmane sent a meticulously worded scroll acknowledging the stabilization of energetic anomalies and proposing a formal alliance, seeing the strategic advantage. Vorlak of Nightfang was silent, which was more concerning than any protest. Garen of Blood Moon, however, was not silent. His message arrived by snarling, reluctant courier. It was not a scroll, but a crude bark paper missive scorched at the edges. The words were few and furious. Abomination confirmed. You have sold wolfkind to the spirits of Leaf and Shadow. The Blood Moon Pack does not bow to monsters. The true alphas will remember what we are. It was a declaration of schism, a promise of future war. Kieran read it, his new calm expression not flickering. He crumpled the bark paper in his hand, and it dissolved into motes of gold and silver dust. Fear is the last enemy to surrender, he said, his voice matter of fact. We will not seek war, but we will be ready if it seeks us. Lyra placed a hand on his arm. She could feel the steady, unwavering resolve in him, no longer hot with rage, but cool and immense like a glacier. We must show them, she said, not with force, but with what we are, a united front, a living proof that the old divisions are obsolete. Their first act as the newly forged Guardians was not a military maneuver, but an invitation. They called for a conclave at the Stone of Howls, not just of the 7 packs, but with a seat offered to the Sylvan, represented by Alara. The invitation, carried by magic and wind, stated its purpose simply: to witness the healing of the world and to discuss the future of all who dwell within it. The day of the conclave dawned clear and bright. The atmosphere at the stone was electric with trepidation and wild hope. The packs assembled, their banners flying. The Blood Moon contingent was notably small and stood apart, glowering. When Kieran and Lyra arrived, they did so without a military escort. They walked alone from the tree line to the stone. Their mere presence commanded a silence deeper than any command. Lyra wore a gown that seemed woven from living ivy and starlight, the moon-silver diadem glowing fiercely. Kieran wore no armor, only simple clothes, but his authority was absolute, emanating from him like gravity. Alara stood a respectful pace behind them, a symbol of the reconciled worlds. Kieran spoke, his voice carrying to every ear without effort. We stand before you not as Shadowfen alone, but as a bridge. The ancient wound between the wolf's soul and the heart of the world is closed. The magic that flows is now whole, and it will make all our people stronger, clearer, truer. He looked directly at the Blood Moon contingent. This is not a loss of what we are. It is a remembering of what we were always meant to be, guardians of a living world, not just conquerors of territory. Lyra stepped forward. She raised her hands, not in a gesture of power, but of offering. From her palms, a gentle wave of silver-gold light spread outward, washing over the assembled thousands. It did not compel, it healed. Old aches faded. Lingering doubts quieted, a sense of profound, peaceful connection to the earth and to each other blossomed in every heart. It was an experience, not a lecture. The Frostmane wolves looked at their paws in wonder. The Sunstalkers closed their eyes in bliss. Even some of the younger Blood Moon wolves seemed to sway, their anger confused by this undeniable feeling of rightness. Kieran, however, remained unmoved, his face a thundercloud of hatred. "Sorcery," he bellowed, breaking the blessed silence. "You cloud their minds with pretty lights. The wolf is strength, is tooth and claw, not this gentle corruption." He turned to the other alphas. "Will you follow this? Will you let the heart of the wolf be tamed by forest magic?" It was Theron of Sunstalker who answered. He stood, his face calm. "I feel no corruption, Kieran. I feel a strength I haven't known since I was a pup running under the full moon, a strength that comes from belonging, not from dominating." Yvain nodded her agreement. Vorlak gave a slow, thoughtful nod, his pragmatic mind clearly weighing the benefits of this new, stable power against the old ways of conflict. The conclave was at a tipping point. The majority were swayed, overcome by the tangible proof of healing and unity, but Kieran and his hardcore followers represented a virulent and dangerous seed of the old hatred. Lyra knew a speech wouldn't convince them, only a demonstration of what their new unity truly meant. She looked at Kieran, and a plan passed between them in an instant, perfectly understood through their fused souls. They turned not to Kieran, but to the great stone of Howells itself. Together, they placed their hands upon its ancient, scarred surface. Lyra channeled her sylvan magic, the song of growth and connection. Kieran channeled the deep, enduring strength of the wolf, the spirit of the pack, of loyalty and fierce protection. The stone, which had witnessed only conflict and judgment for centuries, began to change, its black surface softening, becoming like dark soil.
From its cracks and runes, life erupted. Silvery grass sprouted. Tiny, glowing flowers bloomed. A single, strong sapling of a world heart tree pushed its way from the very top, its leaves shimmering gold and silver. The stone was no longer a monument to division. It was a living testament to unity. The gasps from the crowd were universal. This was not an illusion. It was a permanent, miraculous transformation of a sacred symbol. Kieran stared, his defiance finally cracking into something like despair. His cause was not just unpopular, it was now fundamentally opposed by the very nature of the world, as demonstrated by its guardians. Without another word, he turned and stalked away, his followers shuffling uncertainly behind him. The schism was real, but it was isolated. The conclave had not ended in a unanimous agreement, but it had ended with a new, dominant truth cemented in stone and spirit. The age of the Guardians had begun. The bridge was built, and the first hesitant steps across it had been taken by all. Chapter 15. The New Dawn. The seasons turned in Shadowfen, but they turned with a new rhythm. The harsh winter winds carried less bite, and the spring arrived not with a struggle, but in a joyous, sudden burst of life. The kingdom flourished under the quiet, pervasive influence of its guardians. Lyra's Healer's Hall became a center of learning not just for medicine, but for understanding the new, balanced magic. Young wolves and sylvan-born humans with awakened sensitivities came to study, their previously confounding abilities now guided and understood. Kieran's rule evolved. He no longer governed through command alone, but through a deep, empathetic connection to the land and his people. He could sense discontent before it became rebellion, understand a need before it was voiced. His judgments were fair, rooted in a wisdom that seemed to draw from the stones and the streams themselves. The schism with the Blood Moon Pack did not erupt into the feared war. Kieran, isolated and stewing in his bitterness, found his influence waning. Reports trickled in of younger Blood Moon wolves feeling the pull of the stabilized magic and the prosperity of the allied packs, quietly leaving to seek their fortune elsewhere.
The old hatred was dying, not with a bang, but with the slow, inexorable growth of a new reality. One evening, a full year after the conclave, Lyra and Kieran stood on their now familiar balcony. The twin moons were aligned, one silver, one gold, casting the mountains in a duotone glow. The sapling on the stone of Howells was now a young tree, visible as a distant speck of shimmering light on the plain. "It's quiet," Lyra said, leaning into his side. Not the quiet of dread, but the quiet of deep contentment. "It is," Kieran agreed, his arm around her. "The fractures are healed. The packs are at peace. Even Vorlak sends regular trade envoys." He looked down at her, his eyes amber with rings of silver, soft in the moonlight. "We did what we set out to do. We built a world where we could be together." Lyra smiled, turning to face him. "We built a world for everyone to be together. That was the real magic." She reached up and touched his face, the living sigil on her colon blooming faintly at the contact. "Do you ever miss it, the simplicity of before?" Kieran thought for a moment, his gaze looking inward. "I miss the idea of it sometimes, the illusion of control, but I would not trade a second of this complexity, this depth, for all the simple control in the world." He captured her hand, kissing her palm right over the sigil. "You are my complexity, my depth, my everything." The bond between them, now the fundamental truth of their existence, swelled with a warmth that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with love. It was a feeling of home, of completion, of a journey that had ended exactly where it was always meant to. A few days later, a different kind of messenger arrived. A young blood moon wolf, thin and travel-weary, presented himself at the gate. He carried no weapon, only a small, rough-woven pouch. He was brought before the throne. "Alpha Guardian," he said, bowing deeply to Kieran.
Then to Lyra. "Queen Guardian, I am Finn, son of no one of importance from the Blood Moon Crags. I have left. Many of us are leaving. The old ways are a prison." He held out the pouch. "I brought an offering, a seed from the last world heart tree that grew in our territory centuries ago. We kept it, not knowing what it was, as a curse. I give it to you, as a hope." Lyra took the pouch, her heart aching with a bittersweet joy. Inside was a single crystalline acorn, pulsing with a feeble, dormant light. She cradled it in her hands, and with a whisper of her sylvan magic, she felt its story: loneliness, neglect, but a stubborn, unquenchable spark of life. "It is not a curse, Finn," she said gently. "It is a promise waiting to be kept. You are welcome here." That afternoon, they planted the acorn in the royal gardens, between a plot of Eve's tear and a stand of proud, dark pines. Lyra and Kieran placed their hands on the soil above it together. Their combined magic, a gentle surge of gold and silver, sank into the earth. The ground warmed. A minute later, a brilliant green shoot pierced the soil, growing visibly until it stood a handbreadth tall, its first 2 leaves shimmering with potential. Finn watched, tears in his eyes. It was a new beginning, literally taking root. He had not just found a new pack, he had witnessed the birth of a new symbol. As the years unfurled, the tale of the healer and the Alpha King passed into legend, then into myth, and finally into the quiet truth of the world itself. They ruled not for decades, but for centuries, their lives extended by the harmonious magic they embodied. They were less seen as rulers and more as constants, like the mountains, like the seasons. The sapling on the stone and the tree in the Shadowfen garden grew into great, majestic beings, their branches intertwining across the magical strata, a permanent bridge sustaining the peace.
They never had children of the traditional sort. Their legacy was the world they healed, the unity they forged. Every new pup born with a gift for growing things, every wolf who felt a deeper connection to the forest, every peaceful alliance between pack and glade, that was their child, that was their dynasty. On the day their long reign gently transitioned into something else, they walked one last time into the sylvan glade, now fully reunited with the wolf territories. They stood before the original World Heart tree. They were old, yet their eyes held the same light. "It is time," Kieran said, his voice the rustle of autumn leaves, yet still strong. "To become part of the song," Lyra finished, her smile as bright as a girl by a river. They embraced, and as they did, their physical forms dissolved not into nothing, but into pure, radiant energy, a final, glorious surge of gold and silver light. This light did not fade. It rose, weaving itself into the branches of the World Heart tree, becoming two new, brilliant stars in the constellation of its glowing leaves. Their consciousness spread, becoming one with the hum of the roots, the whisper of the wind, the pulse of life in every creature under the twin moons. They were not gone. They were everywhere. In the strength of the mountains they endured, in the resilience of the smallest flower pushing through snow, they hoped, in the bond of every pair of souls who found courage in each other, they loved. The Alpha King and the moon-touched Queen had become what they were always meant to be, the eternal guardians, the silent, beautiful harmony at the heart of a world finally and forever made whole. The end.